All right, all right. It is Wednesday night, and we are here with the crew for another VibeRant. Been a while since we rocked a VibeRant. Slick and I have been busy, hot on the trail of the god of mischief, Loki. That's been taking up a lot of our airtime, but this triumphant return is twofold. We've got Michelle and Mario and Kyle all returning to give us the goods on Ophiuchus, Astroherbalism. I'm so excited about this. We began this series a year ago in Sagittarius season. It was one of the biggest highlights of my month every month as we covered all the signs. Definitely couldn't pass up the opportunity with the way that it all just kind of timed perfectly to give ourselves one more ride with the Astroherbalism crew. Can't wait. We're going to get into some deep, deep waters, Ophiuchus being the most enigmatic and in some ways potentially most powerful sign symbolism wise. And you betcha we got that exact level of plant medicine and plant teacher on deck for our talk tonight. It's going to be so awesome. The synchronicity is already thick. We're doing this on 12/13. So 12 signs of the zodiac and then the 13th. That's weird enough, but it gets better. The 13th of December, according to David Matheson, when Mario and I were speaking with him about Ophiuchus not long ago, is the day that the sun actually crosses the foot of Ophiuchus as his toe dips into the zodiac. We did not plan ahead of time. Like, we got to do it on this day specifically. This was the day everybody was available. And not only that, it's episode 113 of VibeRant. So we got 13s all up in this shiz. Could not be better. So I'm extremely excited to do this. Guys, welcome everybody. How's everyone doing? Before we start, I want to do a little bit, before I pass the talking stick, a little bit of promo that I think you guys should know about. First of all, I've got a long-running affiliation throughout the entire duration of this series and into the future indefinitely with Kyle of Tippecanoe Herbs, where you can pick up his awesome herbal medicines, incense, salves, tinctures, you name it, all of the goods. Using the Interverse coupon code for 10% off. You support the podcast with that. It's going to be linked in the show notes of every episode, including this one, so do check it out. Secondly, you may have noticed if you follow me on Telegram or social media that I've really upped my game on clips and short videos, taking short form out of my long form content. I say I've upped my game. That's actually all my wife. Thank you, Jenny, for providing us with those really creatively done clips. And so if you're a Instagrammer or a TikToker and you want to follow me over there, especially my TikTok, it's pretty new, needs some love. Go over and find Interverse Podcast there. I'm going to show you guys a 1-minute short that we've got from 1 year ago. So you can see how everybody appeared as we spoke about Sagittarius way back in the second episode of this series. And I hope you enjoy. Beautiful herbs, plants, mushrooms, all of their many virtues of these wonderful gifts that the Creator has bestowed upon us.
Sagittarius is a visionary. It's related to sight. RHODOPSIN increases the visual purple aspect in your eyes, enhancing the hues of purple that we can see in a visual spectrum.
So glorious how the doctrine of signatures is direct gnosis.
Dandelion roots make a lovely coffee substitute.
How many people walk by dandelions, never know their entire life that they're good for anything?
I really like the idea of spice road herbs being of Sagittarius. It's the travel aspect involved. It's the way that it locomotes around and sticks to you. It sticks to your Sagittarian parts. Ingesting boswellia and thinking about ourselves as a temple. The aroma of frankincense is so divine. And gifts of the Magi, the gifts of the Sagi.
The tree, original wounded healer.
We're talking about Jupiter, so we're talking about this expansiveness. I think of abundance as well. So you don't have to look very far for medicine.
All right. Thank you for that awesome clip, Jenny. You're doing such a good job. And it makes excellent material for you guys to help share this podcast to people you think would love it. Give them the bite-sized chunk. Spread the love. We appreciate you. And with all that, let's get our crew. I pass the talking stick to Kyle. What's up, dude? How you been?
Great. I'm awesome. Thanks so much for welcoming us back. It's really cool to be back in the house with my homies, talking about plants, talking about the cosmos, and everything in between. And I'm fired up. having a heck of a season. This is a busy season for me, as far as retail and getting everybody their Interverse coupon discount code orders out in the mail. But I love it. It's what I signed up for, and it's what I love doing. And I'm just having a great time. Stoked for talking about some of these plants tonight. This is a really fun subject to explore. There's no material. This has to be original. You know, when we're thinking about some of these other zodiacal signs, there's plenty of other people's opinions on those other herbs that we can kind of cross-reference or reflect on our own. There's nothing. This is like new frontier, and I'm really happy to be blazing this with y'all. So this is really cool.
Blaze it up. That's very Ophiuchus. One other thing I want to mention: this podcast channel was born either under Sagittarius or Ophiuchus, depending on how you look at it. So it's near and dear to my heart. The symbolic meaning of Ophiuchus is perfectly aligned with my mission and intention with the podcast. So Michelle, Mario, good to see you guys again. Michelle, got to give you compliments. Your podcast is going excellent. Mario, I enjoyed your Libra reveals you did recently on your channel. Make sure you guys are following Symbolic Studies and Michelle's Healing Home on anywhere that you might want to get their content, because they're doing a great job teaching us all kinds of stuff. So please tell everyone what's new that you want them to know about, what you've been up to.
Right on. Thanks for having us, man. Bub, do you want to go first?
Go for it. You got the mic.
Okay. As Chance mentioned, Symbolic Studies, that's my project, symbolicstudies.com, michelleshealinghome.com. I'm pumped to get into Ophiuchus. What a fascinating sign. I think it's so cool that this is the last sign we're tackling for this series. And I didn't know about the beginning of Interverse potentially being a sign, or Ophiuchus being the sign for Interverse. That's really awesome. I feel like there is just this incredible sort of well with Ophiuchus that I'm still wrapping my head around. So I'm going to share what I've been learning over the last, couple of months, it seems like, with this sign. But there is just so much more that we can get into, perhaps at some point. So I'm really digging this 13th sign business for a whole bunch of reasons. I appreciated what we talked about with David Matheson. That was really cool. And I'm very curious to see what you guys think about this. Slick, especially you, I have to say, because we haven't talked about this constellation yet, and I know you're going to bring it. But I'm going to pass the mic over to Michelle.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Chance, for having us back. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody in the chat. Thanks for being here. I, too, am really pumped about this. And actually, we've talked about Ophiuchus over the years, but this is the first year that Mario started his digging, and then all the things he was relaying to me was sparking my interest. And then when Chance proposed us come back for herbs, I'm like, yeah, we should do it, because there is a lot of stuff. And I like what you said, Kyle, about this being an untapped place within the herbal areas, and I think it's untapped in a lot of areas too. A lot of it's kind of a controversial topic in astrology circles as well. So I'm glad we're going for it. And the Healing Home also was born in Sagittarius as well. So that's really cool, Chance, and that's awesome. So let's do it. Let's hop in, and I'm really stoked to hear what everybody has to say.
All right, let's see. Gabe, you got some introductory thoughts? I know that your cup often runneth full and overfloweth.
So very true. So very true. It's funny, the statue in my mind often with Ophiuchus is the one that people associate with Vatica. Vatica she's holding a bull's horn in one hand with snakes wrapped on her arm, and the snake fangs are on the edge of the cup, so she can harvest the poison of the snakes. So their fangs are literally on the edge of the cup. That's a Vatica icon. But this Ophiuchus character has so many of the same ingredients, the serpent charmer. But I think this is one of the father figures of pharmakia, of giving remedy, and something that's fascinating because it's obscure, and when people discover it, it's so exciting. They get a sense. I got a sense. I'm speaking for myself. I think other people get this too. They get the sense that this is what I was looking for. This is what was wrong. This is the missing days of the calendar. This is where the remedy's going to be. And Ophiuchus has this presence that gives you the sense that remedy is here. We can fix something if we get this Ophiuchus thing figured out. And that's awesome, because that's what pharmakia is. You put your sin into a icon or a symbol. Everybody does. Everybody takes a turn putting their sin in this icon, and then it takes the sin away from the city and makes everything better again. So it gives us a good reset. And I only recently learned, as you guys were doing the show with Matheson, I was looking at the star map and I started to realize, nice chance, yes. I started to realize that Ophiuchus's heel, if a drop of blood drips off of his heel, it would fall straight down onto the Ara Altair constellation, which is the magician's table of the Magi card. And so a drop of blood would land on the working space of the scientist. And sure enough, on this table down there is also the microscope, where you would give your DNA for the Magi to tell you who your past was and where you're going in the future. So yeah, all things DNA in the mysticism of pharmakia. We still call it big pharma, so this symbol is so supercharged. It's fascinating. And it's got that lost sheep, stray, runaway, rebel walking away from the other 12. It's got a lot of Judas Iscariot cooked into it. Okay. So I'll stop there.
Good reference there. This is Vanth, which is sometimes considered a singular entity. Sometimes there's more than one of them. You find statues and artwork from ancient Etruscans with this psychopomp figure, often associated with or alongside Charon, which is like a prototype of Chiron, or Charon the ferryman. Mario and I got into the Vanth in our psychopomp episode. That was really great. But I wanted to just bring this image up so people could see what he was talking about. This goes back really far. And I even think that a lot of times when we see angel iconography with the wings, at least particularly Gabriel and Michael, the archangels, that those wings might actually be the serpents of Ophiuchus, the constellation, just imagined as something else in the outline. So wanted to bring that up, not to poo-poo on your weave or anything, Gabe, but Vatica, I can't find any receipts on Vatica being real other than references on the internet in terms of it being an Etruscan deity. That doesn't mean that there isn't something there, but I'd love to be able to back up things that we say. So that's why I mentioned that. So it doesn't seem like we're completely shooting from the hip.
Yep, I've heard this before. And one thing I'll say is that directly under Rome is Mount Etna, where Medusa is located. So the Medusa is the Vatica. So on a map, I can show you that the Vatica is under the Vatican. It's literally south of the building of the Vatican is where Medusa lives. But then if you follow Michael's spear, the spear of St. Michael, it runs through the Echidna Islands on its way to Jerusalem. And so there's plenty of Vatica underneath Rome. There's plenty. You're just not looking at the right maps.
Well, I mean, just not that one specific name of a deity, but the concept. I mean, Medusa is Ophiuchian AF in many ways, or Perseus slaying Medusa, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's bring up the star map here and go around the horn again, talking about what this constellation resonates to each of us individually. And I'll start. The most significant element of Ophiuchus is this idea of stepping off the zodiac and leaving behind the cycle or the circle, the programming or the tendencies that are not our true self that we have identified with over time through conditioning and things like that. That Ophiuchus represents characters or even pathways to wisdom, or even gatekeepers or thresholds to access wisdom that allows us to self-actualize. And when I say self-actualize, I mean invoke the highest aspect of self, a holistic existence that being just 1 out of 12 doesn't really cut for, can't really do it. So Ophiuchus is definitely related to ideas like wisdom and gates. I think that's why Pallas Athena or Pallas Minerva is associated with Ophiuchus so heavily. I mean, she's got all the iconography that you could want, a shield, the aegis with the snake-headed trim on the bottom, a spear or a staff, a winged, or not a winged, a crested helmet, all of that. And then her epithet, Pallas, is said to refer to wisdom, but there are many philological connections to that P to the L that give you ideas relating to gates. So the gateway to wisdom, that's what Ophiuchus, you could boil it down to just one soundbite. I'm going to kick it over to Mario. He looks ready.
I am ready. Yes, exactly right. So the gateway to wisdom, I really like that. And there's a couple of different ways of looking at the numerology with this, of number 13, of the 13 breaking that solar 12 cycle, right? 12 is very much a solar number. And so the 13 would be the step or the threshold beyond that 12, the conventional 12, if you will. And also, the other way to look at it would be if you had 12 points on a circle, the 13th point would be that center point. So that would be the point of transcendence, right? That would be the still point within the sacred center, right? And so what's really fascinating to me is when I first came across Ophiuchus, the material I was reading, where I really started paying attention to it, the material I was reading was saying that it was compared to a bend in a river, and that it takes you off of the main stream to an alternative stream. And the material I was reading was saying that it's actually pointing you in the direction of the northern sky. And I think it's fascinating that when you look at the head of the serpent, oftentimes it's pointing directly to Ursa Major and Minor. And so it's almost like creating this line to those two constellations. And I have a book here that I've talked about a lot lately. It's called Polaria, and it's by this fellow named W.H. Mueller, and I've gotten to know him, actually, over the last couple of months, and he explicitly says in this book that Ophiuchus is the exit out of the zodiac towards the north, and so he heavily connects Ophiuchus with the polar or northern tradition, which I think is really fascinating. Now, this may have been the old understanding, but it seems like in the solarized world, the new understanding, and I have another book here called Galactic Alignment that has some interesting information about Ophiuchus. And so I'm not reading this one cover to cover, not yet at least, but this author right here is saying that essentially the gateway to wisdom, the sacred center of the heavens in the polarized northern sort of tradition, was the center of the heavens, Polaris, and now in the solarized world, this new gateway or this new axis is the galactic center, and that a lot of the symbolism switched from the northern sky, the 7 stars of Ursa Major and Minor, and over time, basically, a lot of that symbolism was basically transferred over to this new axial alignment that a lot of people recognize today as basically the Pleiades and basically the point in between Ophiuchus, Scorpio, and Sagittarius, that being the galactic center. So Ophiuchus has always been associated with the center. The idea of what the center is, that has transferred over and that has switched. And so the 7 stars of the north, it seems as though a lot of that symbolism was transferred over to the 7 stars of the Pleiades, which is the galactic anti-center. So you're looking towards this part of the heavens, you're looking towards the center of the galaxy, you're looking towards Taurus and the Pleiades, you're looking away from the center of the galaxy. But also Ophiuchus, man, the key words for me personally, when I look into it, I think of all of the symbolism related to the 13, blood, I think of the moon, and I think of Mercury. And there's a huge correspondence between Mercury and the moon that's continuing to blow my mind. But to me, this feels very much like another expression of Mercury, personally. So just a few thoughts off the top of my head. Bub, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I really like what you're saying here. And I feel like I'm still learning about this sign. But what really comes to mind is mystery and the healing that happens within the mysteries of ourselves, the mysteries of other people, the great mysteries of this world and beyond, and actually how much wisdom comes from that. And so I get a huge wisdom sort of hit from Ophiuchus, and I love the idea of it being the bend in the river, because to me, the 13 also, it sometimes gets a bad rap, obviously. In mainstream culture, Friday the 13th, 13 is bad luck. Oh my goodness, it's scary, blah, blah, blah. But when you really start looking into 13, you find out that it has a lot to do with the primordial mother, the creation of whatever we're living in here. And there's actually a very rooted and grounded energy in the 13. And so I think it's really interesting that, in pop culture, mainstream, it's been inverted, just like so many other things have been inverted, which I also think is a reason why Ophiuchus doesn't get talked about that often. And it's kind of like hidden away, and then it's like this taboo thing or what have you. So that's kind of where my mind goes. So it makes me want to know more about it because of how mysterious it is and how it's kind of like shunned away.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I'll add to is the 13 as it relates to the lunar cycles.
Yeah.
And then that correspondence or relationship with menstruation. There's a lot kind of going on there. And you said Friday the 13th, so I have to mention that some of my resources talked about the Knights Templars having kind of an affinity for Ophiuchus and potentially going by a 13 sign sort of system. So Tracy Twyman talked about that, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
But we can pass the baton.
All right. Playing with some different layouts here. Kyle, I would like to know where you're at with Ophiuchus conceptually.
I definitely want to second everything that Mario is saying. I see Ophiuchus as a really great stepping stone out of the mundane wheels on the bus go round and round solar symbolism that we have here, and into a three-dimensional sky. It really does resonate with me in that way as an archetype for that. Just even in that previous thing that you showed, the depiction of him kind of like stepping up, and he's in this artistic rendition that you were showing there. This man is can be interpreted as wrestling this serpent, and so that conjures the image to me of Apollo and the victory over Python, and the lesson in that, which is, Apollo was wrestling Python, and then he became so proud of himself and so boastful of himself, defeating this serpent, that he ended up, talking smack to Eros, who landed him a poison lead dart, and then eventually fell in love with the wrong tree, basically, the bay leaf tree. I think it was Daphne who turned herself into a bay leaf tree to get away from him. So there's a lesson in that. But then also the depiction that we just saw there, which is something that I resonate more with, is the care that is given to bearing the weight of the journey beyond, the journey outside of the box, the journey beyond the ruled system. You get 12 pieces of pie. How are you going to divide it into 13? And there'll even be some smack talk in astrological communities very often about, whenever just the word Ophiuchus, it's like a trigger. And so here's a depiction of a person bearing that weight, caring for the serpent, which represents that wisdom as he steps up. The other thing I noticed too is that he seems to be looking past Zeus in that depiction. And I always noticed he always kind of looks like he's looking over at Boötes. Like there's this strong relationship. I think that he's like looking over towards his buddy Boötes. And in that, I was going to present an herb today grapes, but one of my research has led me to the this figure Ampelos, who was a satyr, and he was a lover of Dionysus, and Dionysus was like Ampelos was like Dionysus's sidekick, and so he eventually, puts him up into the stars as Bootes to commemorate that, and then Ophiuchus would represent Dionysus in this particular instance too. And so it's really fascinating to me all of the different ways that Ophiuchus can depict all of these different historical figures or mythological figures throughout time, and really give a great context to all of the different stories of the zodiac as the different character Ophiuchus. So yeah, those are a couple of my thoughts right there.
Beautiful, man. There's definitely a good system going to have 12 signs to easily measure out. Like you said, it's not easy to do a 13 pie slice circle, right? The concept of Ophiuchus can help us better understand this time in the year and in the sky clock, though. And what's laid up in it symbolically is absolutely useful and valid and worth investigating. One thing that came to mind is how if Ophiuchus is pointing towards the middle, well, on the number line, when you get to 13, that's where the sequence begins that encodes pi in the number line, because the first digits of pi are 3.1415. So 13, 14, 15, in that sequence, you have the first digits of pi, which would begin right in the middle of the 13, aka Ophiuchus. And what is pi? Pi is the transcendental number. So we're talking about transcendence here. We're talking about the radius, which is a line from the outer circumference of a circle to the middle of the circle. So in many ways, in every wisdom tradition, all religions talking about the same thing. As our friend Marty Leeds likes to say, the riddle is to find the middle. And there's never been wiser words than that. But let's kick into gear talking about some of the associations we might make to the major arcana. There isn't, as far as I know, a traditional Ophiuchus rulership to any particular card, but Mario has offered 13, Death, as an Ophiuchian card. I think that fits, being that Scorpio is right in that vicinity. And then we've also got, after this, we'll talk about the World card or Universe, which I think is an appropriate potential as well. So let's kick it over to Mario here.
Yeah, so this was an interesting sort of exercise here to see what card fits best with Ophiuchus. And I kept on thinking about the 13th card, Death, here, and then you had brought up the Universe, and I'm like, that fits really, really well. And so the 13 being this number that's related to death and also rebirth, right? And so that fits with Ophiuchus nicely. A lot of Ophiuchus symbolism too, because it is a hidden sign, it does associate with the color black. And so it kind of associates with this idea of a veil, the unknown, the mysteries. And I think that death is appropriate here as well. You'll even notice, right, in the Crowley version, the skeleton itself is black. And so that's interesting. And I know some of the plants that we'll be talking about have this connection with the color black as well. And so this idea of Ophiuchus being a psychopomp as well, I think fits with all of this too. And also the death card, and you'll see with the Marseille card on the left-hand side, it actually doesn't say death. So this is a tradition, right, is that death is oftentimes unnamed, or his name isn't printed on the card. It'll be the only major arcana card that doesn't have its name printed on it. And so it speaks to this silence, this hidden nature, once again. And so for a few different reasons, I think death is appropriate. And as you mentioned, Chance, the whole connection with Scorpio and Scorpio being right there, that's pretty perfect.
You even see a serpent here on the Crowley death card. What's the Hebrew letter associated there?
I believe it's none, N-U-N, fish.
Mm-hmm. So that's also right at the threshold of our 26-letter alphabet, 13 to 14. That's right there.
And so mem, the letter M, also applies with Ophiuchus symbolism, being the 13th letter, and then Scorpio having the M glyph and Virgo having the M glyph, and then M being, phonetically it's more internal, it's inside your mouth, things like that. So yeah, good call.
So in terms of the idea of death too, associating with Ophiuchus, we know that handling serpents can be deadly. In terms of the faith aspect of that, it's fascinating how there are these churches, and particularly like the southern states of the United States, where people will handle venomous serpents and their faith protects them. They don't get bit, or if they get bit, they don't get poisoned. So there's a long tradition, I'm sure, associating the serpent and its dangers with some kind of faith mystery, which is powerful as well. And then, of course, the moment of death is the transition off of the wheel, off of your character as established in the zodiac. So there's a lot there. Anybody else want to weigh in on what they might see as a possible Ophiuchian trait with the death card, number 13?
Totally. On the symbol for Ophiuchus, if people don't know, it's in your emojis. You could go into the zodiac sign and you'll see it's a horseshoe or like a magnet shape with a squiggly water line going through both of the arms of the magnet, which looks very Baphometish to me. I'm seeing a lot of coagula salva in that squiggly line aspect. I have woven in the past with Michael Wan on the possibility that the Susquehanna River is a bit of a Baphomet in its shape and also in the points of origin at both arms of the river. On one hand is the Herkimer diamonds, the other hand is anthracite coal. Very mysterious materials at the end of the hands of that river. But I think the horseshoe or that oxbow, it's called an oxbow in a river, I think that's harnessed for geomantic purposes. I think they actually make rivers, they design them to have those in there so they can actually create a natural dialectic, a resistance against the flow that can be harnessed. And this is all a lesson that is encapsulated in a single glyph. Just the water shape in a horseshoe is telling you Benjamin Franklin's secrets right there. Benjamin Franklin actually harnessed the river in Philadelphia. So the Museum of the Arts is literally a living embodiment of the expression of the symbol of Ophiuchus. The Museum of the Arts is where you can find Ophiuchus's glyph in action in a building. Okay, I had to say that. And also South Bend, Indiana. I live very near South Bend. South Bend is the same thing with the horseshoe. They're harnessing these energies. They have been for a very long time. But South Bend is where Notre Dame is at. And we know about river rituals around Catholic spires and cathedrals. This is where we have a character on the world stage right now. His name is Booty Judge. Booty Judge, Pete Buttigieg comes from Notre Dame. He's from South Bend. South Bend is the name of the city. I'm just described to you this horseshoe shape, this South Bend. Do you guys also notice that Ophiuchus is always showing his ass? That we're always looking at the butt side of Ophiuchus? Okay. This is one small step for man, one small step for man. That's 4. 1 + 3 is 4. And one giant leap for mankind. That ritual, that ceremony of whatever the moon thing was all about, that hullabaloo, was an Ophiuchian ritual because you see him coming off that ladder when they say those words. And now also, that's the anode side. That's the big up. That's the positive. We're prideful now. We expect people to envy us. We're the number 4 individual because we have one small step for man. Well, crazy enough, there's an anode and a cathode here. The other end of the same ritual was Jackie climbing off the back of that limousine. That was an Orpheus ritual. It's the same exact point on the zodiac and it's the shame and the downfall and the horrible tragedy of it all. So on one hand, we have this uplifting camaraderie, and on the other hand, we have this terrible trauma. But it's all in the same point, and that's what I think where everybody picks up on is this is a point in need of remedy. There's much to solve around this very unique location in the heavens.
And I'm realizing now, looking at
one more
death. Oh, go for it.
I got one more. The bloody rag between the legs. The bloody rag between the legs. It is like the world card. It does have that shroud of Turin. You know, the world card is sometimes called the veiled one. But it also, everybody should also remember the ladies. They have bloodied fabrics are a part of being a lady. You know, and all of that is sacred. It's totally sacred, and it needs a sacred place. But I thought I would just mention that this removal of blood in a safe and prescribed way that honors the blood for what it is, because everybody responds to blood differently and has different relationships with it. I think that's also a part of this removal of scapegoat magics.
I think the death card is appropriate too, because the Ophiuchus figure is often a psychopomp. And that means like the person who carries you from the world of the living to the spirit world, or guides the soul through the purgatory experience. I was doing some research for the Marvelous Demystifiers Loki series about purgatory and the origins of that as a concept. And something interesting came up called the celestial underworld, I believe is how they refer to it, or the celestial Hades. And this was an idea that what the pagan concept of purgatory was actually thought to be somewhere in the sky. And when you're looking at like if you have a planisphere and you put Ophiuchus at the bottom of the star chart and you track directly upwards towards the center, then going past Ophiuchus, you reach the Hercules constellation, which is usually associated with the Sky Father, top god. And then beyond that, you get to Draco, and then you get to the Ursa Minor, and then you get to the pole. Right around there, though, after you pass Ophiuchus, in that same general area of the sky is where, like if we go back here, you can see it actually. You see right above him, there's Cerberus and Hercules. So that's like Pluto and or Serapis or Hades and the three-headed dog that guards the underworld. It was often right there with Ophiuchus type figures and iconography. Really, all of the gods kind of resolve down into three and then into one, of course. But I think it's interesting that death in that moment, especially with near-death experiences, people often meet Jesus or Buddha. Both of them are well-established Ophiuchian figures in astrotheological studies, particularly highlighted by David Matheson. So, yeah, death happens, and then you meet Ophiuchus on your way up, or you meet characters associated with Ophiuchus, to each their own, based on maybe their memory field and their belief system. But I find that pretty fascinating that the 13 is death, and that's the moment you would need a psychopomp to guide you through your underworld journey, which the further I go with it, I'm definitely thinking the underworld is the heavens, not inside the earth. Apart from the point that the heavens actually turn and go under the earth partially, like half of the sky does. There's that aspect, but yeah, there's a lot to it. And then we have the world card, which the obvious symbolism here, you see she's holding two batons in the more classic, the older versions of the card. There's the whole circle that she's in the center of. The sash that she's wearing, that's basically a replacement idea for the serpents. In fact, even in the Odyssey, the titular character Ulysses or Odysseus, he's actually granted a sash, which has protective qualities. And I think that this sash in symbolism is usually something that is referring to the way that the constellation Ophiuchus looks in the sky, and the characters that use a magical sash in their legend are referencing this part of the sky clock. So What do you guys think about the world? Anybody want to weigh in first?
Yeah, I got one. Just another reference to Apollo here. The victory of Apollo over Python was claiming the bay laurel tree as his victory eventually. And so here we have a wreath of laurel. This is symbolizing kind of like a victorious conclusion. And I went back and I listened to the episode that you did a second time with Mario and David Matheson. And I just found that episode to be extremely beneficial for anyone studying Ophiuchus. And his mentioning of the Hector having two scepters there. And so we could see that with both of these cards too. And also in this, the universe card over here on the right, the Thoth deck, and how looks like the serpent. It just calls to mind something I just forgot to mention is as the serpent bearer, as somebody who is actually examining the snake in the form of an augury reader, that's looking at the, as Gabe has mentioned previously, like looking at the entrails of the serpent, or it's not a serpent, it's just entrails in general. It's just he's just bearing this. And that actually just reminded me too that in Italian, that word auguri is a really common word. It's what you say to people every year when they have their birthday or every celebration. You say tanti auguri. It means another one. So it's a very common. So yeah, you'll hear the word auguri, and I think that's really interesting. I wondered what that meant. It was if it had something to do more with this scene into the future, celebrating into the future. It's a good path forward for you. Congratulations on your new job, and of course with the world and the completion, and congratulations and an augury. May the auguries be with you. That kind of thing. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go.
No, you're good, man.
Okay. Well, the Vatican, they say, means divining serpent is one of the interpretations of it. And so, yeah, for the Italians to be like specifically upholding that tradition, that's pretty righteous. I dig that. Thanks for the share. I love this as Ophiuchus. It's a perfect fit. Like she's got her knees bent, her feet are in the absolutely flawless position to be Ophiuchus. But I'm allowing myself to be of two minds because I have a reservation around the Indus constellation that is like a home run for the Thoth world card, but not so much with the Rider-Waite in the other decks. The other decks are much more Ophiuchian, but I've got a bias for the Thoth universe card as the Indus constellation. So, but that doesn't mean anybody's more right than the other, because it's amazing how these the symbolism is transcendent in that aspect. The reason why the Thoth deck lands with Indus is because I found the peacock feather is hiding in the theme of the whole thing, and the peacock is Pavo, which is overlapping Indus. But guess what, guys? Indus is holding 3 arrows in one hand and 1 arrow in the other hand. He's holding the symbol of the 13. So the symbol becomes like a baton passed from the Ophiuchus 13 down to the Indus, who's holding symbols of 1 and 3 in the hands of this Indus. In the Indus constellation, I could go on, but I think those are spears. I don't think Indus is holding arrows with no bow. That doesn't make sense. I think the Indus constellation is holding plumbatas, which are old-fashioned throwing spears. But I don't want to derail us. I just want to say that this is kind of cool how Ophiuchus can be the world card, and also Indus can secretly, on the down low, for those who know, she doesn't like to be known. She's Hestia of the hearth. She likes to be in the private. It can also imprint onto another constellation as well, almost as solidly.
Let me just tack on to where you're going with the augury aspect here that you mentioned. it is definitely true that the Vatican is built on Mons Vaticanus, right? That's what you're referring to. And I believe that this is coming from the Celtic word, which Celtic is Phoenician, vates. Vates were prophets and soothsayers. That word is fascinating because, first of all, Ophiuchus is like on a hill. Hills are churches in the old world. So he's above the rest of the world and he or she is above the rest of the world. So could definitely oversee or prophesy what's to come. The word vate is probably where we get the word fate as well. The fates and the oracles, the vates read your fate. If you do a V to W switch and the T to D switch, vate is Wode or Wade. It's basically Woden is what I'm trying to get at. He's the far seer of the Norse pantheon. So you can easily get Vat to Wode. Vowels are all switchable, or even switch the B instead of a W out of that V, and you get Butte or Bude. So the Vates were the Buddhas of the ancient world, because in my opinion, this is all stemming off of, or whatever Buddhism came from is also definitely related to the ancient worldwide system that this mythology is so concretely unified through in some point in history long past. So yeah, just in that one word, that Vatican seems to be a root, have that as a root word in it. You've got Odin, you've got the fates, you've got Buddha. It's philology is fun, guys. If you learn your letter swaps, you will see things that you will read auguries in your own words.
Philology is fun. That's a bumper sticker, dude.
She has a 314 in her essence. She's a lone figure. The drape around her is the shape of the 3, and there are 4 in the corner. So there's a 3-shaped blanket on her, lone figure with 4 corners. So there's a 314 all up in that card.
Excellent. Yeah, what I see in the universe card and how it could relate to Ophiuchus, I'm thinking about the dead center of like most of these cards here, but I would say especially the 2 on the left, where to me the dead center of the card would be her belly. So it'd be her belly button, it'd be her navel, it would be the womb, right? And so obviously this relates to reproduction, but it's not uncommon to call the center of anything the navel of the Earth, as an example, right? The navel of the cosmos. And so to me, it's all the same thing. I think the world axis, transcends and goes between realms and is what connects everything. And so to me, the world axis symbolism, to me, is off the charts. So her belly, her womb, her navel, being right there, dead center. And then obviously I think of the umbilical cord and some of the placental symbolism that we've gotten into, and how that relates to the world tree, and the world tree being another correspondence for this world axis. And she's in the middle. And so she's in the middle of a cross, right? So she's in the middle of the fixed cross. And so the middle of anything, to me, relates to axial symbolism. And so some of what David Matheson said about Ophiuchus relates heavily to axial symbolism. He was saying that essentially Ophiuchus is like the central mountain in Hindu mythology that has the serpent wrapped around it that basically gets pulled back and forth, right, and creates the nectar of the gods, Amrita. And so this kind of reminds me of a drill bit, right? And there's even other examples of the same symbolism looking just like a drill bit. And I think it's like Horus and Osiris, if I'm not mistaken, pulling this rope or vine or something, drilling this bit. And when you mentioned augury, Kyle, I thought of an auger, an auger being like a drill bit to create a hole, and so I'm just kind of seeing all these things, just being related to each other, because to me, especially with the 2 cards on the left, she is the world axis. So she is the world tree. She is that pillar or post or pole. And so it would make sense that there would be a serpentine symbolic sort of connection going around her, the same way you can imagine a serpent going around a world tree, or the tree of knowledge, or even Draco going around the pole star. But Slick, it seems like you want to say something. Go for it.
Oh, you're so exciting, man. It has been such a wild ride going around with you guys for a full year, man. We have so many threads all over the universe together. It has been such an awesome ride. Yes, the drill bit is just hitting so many chords for me, because of the augury reading, but also we know that there's an agency, a 3-letter agency, and their name sounds a whole lot like the phrase Sea Trails Intelligence Agency. Sea Trails Intelligence Agency. That phrase sounds a whole lot like a 3-letter agency that may have something to do with the divining serpent known as the Vatican. They might have made a holy scripture in 47 and named it the snake-made texts, the Nagas Mahdi texts, right? So yeah, this 3-letter agency, sorry, I'm having fun. They run drills. They run drills before events. They also run drills into the headlines of mankind and seed our consciousness, so we expect to see what they tell us is happening. And so this is the psychic crop dusting that benefits the dogs of war at the Dow Jones, but the drills is really something, man. Now, again, remember, Ophiuchus, a drop of blood would fall straight down onto the Ara Altair constellation, just under his heel. And on the other side of that table is the Indus constellation. But on the table is a microscope, is a telescope. Okay, so what shape is DNA? In the shape of an auger. So DNA is a buy-in. The concept of DNA is a psychic buy-in to your mind. You've given them access. You've said, okay, come on in. I will point out that the tribe of DAN is a very contentious genetics line, has much to do with the Tuatha De Danann, and people who are into certain mythologies are going to get put in crosshairs. But I'm telling you, it is so fascinating to know that DNA is in the shape of an auger that seeds your mind for a bunch of bullshit to be planted, for you to expect somebody else to tell you about your ancestors. Yeah, the CIA, when they got DNA, they started running this op on people where they could come out of nowhere. A total stranger could come out of nowhere and say, "Hey, guess what? We found out that there's actually a secret inheritance, and you're the special one. And if you do this operation for us, we can connect you to your inheritance." And they run people off of cliffs with that kind of shit. And now they got the entire world bought in on this drill. I'm gonna stop. I'm getting excited.
Well, this is great, though. Here's a book that kind of illustrates the point that I'm about to make, which is something I've said before. I think it was a big topic in the previous Interverse episode, but that there's no such thing as cutting edge, frontier, scientific, brand new knowledge outside of abstractions created by further and further levels of bizarre mathematics and simulations. That being said, The Cosmic Serpent, DNA and the Origins of Knowledge by Jeremy Narby. This guy, I believe, had a lot of ayahuasca journeys, is kind of an anthropologist, but his assertion was that DNA is the ancient people were aware of DNA and that there's some information in DNA, and that's whence comes the idea that the serpent contains knowledge. And yeah, it's an interesting book, but what I see here is that, science is giving us this idea of DNA, and that's basically their way of materializing the old symbolism of the serpent in the garden, which in a lot of Gnostic traditions, the serpent is actually attributed to, or an incarnation of Christ. It's not the devil or it's not evil. It's a savior figure in a sense, which, yeah, it's the battle as old as time. Was the snake the good guy or the bad guy? We don't know. We're not here to make judgment calls like that, but there's definitely something to what you're talking about there with the the auger shape and the double helix and the two serpents carried by Ophiuchus. This double helix symbolism is very, very ancient. I think.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I got one more thing to. Sometimes I assume people know things that I've thought of and then forgot, and then I remember them, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't make sense if you don't know this part. And that is that the microscope constellation on the table, next to the table of the Indus down there, the microscopium, its abbreviation name is MIC. There's another 3-letter agency with the same letters there. But it used to be, during the Industrial Revolution, it was a drill press. It was an auger, an industrial auger. And then they say, I don't have receipts on this, but they say that before it was an industrial auger, it was an augury reader in Egyptian cosmology, whose name was, I think, Neter, Neter. And this character is a diviner. And he has Egyptian hieroglyphic symbols that mean that he can see the future. But Chance, isn't this kind of fun? It just occurred to me. Hiero means love. Glyphs is letters. Hieroglyphs is actually like erotic attachment to words. Hieroglyphs. Do you think?
Well, I think that it's sacred. Hiero is sacred, but yeah, that's the same, basically the same word as arrow. So I think there may be a time in the past where erotic energy was thought of as sacred rather than the inversion that's been put on it by more recent religious movements. That's for sure. Neter is a very loaded word in Egyptian, but it's referred to as the name of God, or a name of a god, or a name for gods, plural, the way we would say gods. And it seems evident that that word also gives us in some way connected to the idea of nature. And speaking of nature, we're an hour in, so it's a great time to start talking about herbs that correlate to Ophiuchus, because we could just go all night talking about what symbolism is laid up in this thing. But people are also here to get the goods on how to access this archetype's energy through the plant kingdom, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with planting seeds. There is a problem with drilling seeds into people's minds unsuspectedly. But I guess what I'd like to offer is that transparency of being the good gardener, being responsible with the seeds that we are putting into good soil. And here's the good soil Chance has provided for us with this excellent show and this excellent audience. And so let's plant some seeds and see how they grow into this tying in with this Ophiuchus idea. Okay, black cohosh. This is a Native American name. It comes from the eastern version or eastern area of like the Anishinaabe, northeastern. And the word cohosh is this is where, like, sometimes I'm like, when people say like, oh, there's a patriarchy and blah blah blah, I'm like, I don't know, whatever. But when you read old herbals, there is kind of a evidence of the patriarchy when they say like, oh, black cohosh means like an herb for women's problems, and then like turn the page. That's about it. Like, we want our hands off. We don't want to have anything to do with like women's problems. It's very often it's pigeonholed into an herb that is really, really beneficial for the fluctuations of hormones and body temperature within menopause. But it's it's much more complicated than that. First, I want to say though that the name black cohosh, if we think about the etymology of Ophiuchus, we have Ophi, which is the snake, and then kosh, as in the Cushitic languages. That means the son of Ham. So there was Noah beget Ham, and then Ham beget Cush, and Cush beget Nimrod. And there's that part of the world that is like Ethiopia, and basically the word Cush has a relationship to the word like dark one. And so it's interesting when I look at this word, I see the word like black dark one. It's kind of stands out to me. So this was definitely something that I had been thinking of for this episode, but then when I started going over that etymology, it really got me. Another name for this plant is black snake root. The way that I know this plant sometimes is Chimichifuga racemosa, but the botanist, they came and changed it recently, Achatea racemosa, and that's just this, the priesthood of plants that always wants to fuck around with words. But anyway, as far as the medicinal qualities, yes, it's again a well-known plant for hormone changes in menopause, particularly in women. But I think that it has, I would better describe it as changes that occur in maturation. And that could be the maturation of a moon cycle. So it's really helpful for kind of pulling the plug of built up energy in the as the body is about to or maybe delayed menstruation. It promotes a quick and pain-free labor in the case that it thins the cervix. So it's not something that you want to take until you're about to pop in the case of pregnancy, right? It's actually contraindicated. It is a midwife's herb. So it's this herb is to be handled carefully as if it were, a living snake, I suppose. But the thing that I work with this plant quite a bit for is something that I want to point out in the signature. And the signature is the cerebral spinal fluid. The flower reminds me of the wave movement of the cerebral spinal fluid. Okay. So all around our brain, going down from basically the idea is that Aries, you have the Christos gets formed in Aries and it moves down the cerebral spinal fluid until the 7th house, it's tempted. And in the 8th house in Scorpio, it can be robbed. It could be released. Or it could be the eagle and go back up. Right. And so there's this, the last signs of the zodiac are usually placed over the body in like the non-vital locations. So Sagittarius hips, Capricorn knees, Aquarius, so on. But they're also associated with vital organs of this Christos rising back up. So Sagittarius with the liver, Capricorn with the actual bones in the spinal column, Aquarius with the nerves, Pisces with the endocrine fluids, and the cerebral spinal fluid as well. The cerebral spinal fluid is, from accounts of witnesses that I've heard that have seen it in like a hospital setting when they're doing like a spinal tap, they say that it looks like stars. It looks like the stars. So it has this, to me, it reminds me of like what that would look like would be like the Milky Way, I suppose. But going back to that idea of the Christos going down and not rising back up, but also not being robbed, there's a tendency in a lot of times with this inability of maturation of the menses, and particularly in Scorpio women, for like a dark brooding tendencies, dark brooding pain, just the idea of like darkness, depression, the lack of motivation. And I work with this plant a lot with my clients for relieving that. Let's just say the first week or the first 2 weeks of the cycle, somebody's fine, and then they feel that darkness, and the only thing that actually makes them feel better about that darkness that period is the plug being pulled and feeling like the menses has drained that, so they could feel good again. And so I think this plant is really, really beneficial for that too. I'm talking about a lot. I've worked with this a lot with women, but I also use this with men too, who have that tendency to have bunched up cerebral spinal fluid from a injury like whiplash, from a concussion. And actually, the first time I ever met this plant it was kind of synchronicitous. I went to Dollywood in Tennessee on my honeymoon, and it was the day after Memorial Day. It was a Tuesday, and there was nobody there, so we got to go to all the roller coasters, like one right after another. You know, and
I
like,
went there as a kid. I've been there.
It's
fun.
It's really corny and
Park.
cheesy, you know, amusement park. But I think there's value and virtue in waiting in line for an hour for a ride to like work yourself out, you know, and like get everything like bent back in shape, because we were just going from one to another. And by the end of the day, I had whiplash. The next day we were hiking in the woods, and I saw this plant, and I have no idea what it was, but it was calling to me. And every time I would I just need to sit down. Let me just sit down next to this plant, and I would feel better, and I would feel recharged. And later I found out that this was black cohosh, and that it would also be indicated specifically for what I was dealing with, which was whiplash. And that would be really helpful for concussion. What's up, Mick? Big love to you, man. This plant was introduced to the West via the natives, and they were using this plant for pulling venom out. The roots are called black snake root because they look like a den of vipers. It's very, very dark. The plant is dark the whole time. I mean, this is the flower, but the rest of the plant looks the leaves look dark. The stem looks pretty dark. It's a very dark looking plant. And they also used it to treat tuberculosis. And in cases of North America, it was called a miracle cure for Saint Vitus dance, which is also called chorea. And Saint Vitus dance, that's a really fascinating thing to talk about too, because this is a North American plant, but Saint Vitus is, you know, and the dance of Saint Vitus, this is all from European times, but basically it was kind of like a unexplained twitching, and it's not exactly epilepsy, but the way that it was always described in the old books was that it was like demonic possession. And there was times in Strasbourg where there was like 400 people that died or something from heat stroke for dancing for 2 weeks or something like that. Some accounts 40, some accounts 400. And then even in Puglia, in the heel of Italy, this is where we get the tarantula dance, because there was a woman who was bitten by a venomous creature, and the remedy for it was to shimmy and shake, and it was prescribed, and it was okay, because this is an area of Italy that really embraces the pagan connection with Catholicism too. And so it was okay to shimmy and shake. And they even have like Befana, which is like the person that brings presents at Christmas time. That's like classic witch with the wart on their nose that rides a broom and everything like that. And so black cohosh here in the North America version of Saint Vitus dance, which is like this unexplained cultural madness that overtakes certain people, and it's like a hysteria that makes people dance. And I think it, you know, and the scientific people are like, oh, it's a virus and it's like a magical floating pathogen that goes around and it, you know, it lands inside people's nose. I think it's way more magical than that, and I think it's very, very interesting condition. But anyway, black snake root, black is the name, black cohosh, and it's a great connection with the cerebral spinal fluid. What the cerebral spinal fluid represents as the gateway, the pathway of the Milky Way up to the cosmos, the spine, all of that symbolism that we had been talking about earlier. And to me, I think it's a great introduction to this topic from the herbal standpoint.
It's interesting that you brought up the cerebral spinal fluid, because when you look at Ophiuchus, it's the gateway to wisdom, right? Or the gateway to the north. And he's standing right on that river of stars, or even what you could consider like a spine, which is the Milky Way. And I did not know that fluid could sparkle like stars. I couldn't really see it. I did some Google image searching, but hey, if there was something that like magical and esoteric about an occulted aspect of our body, probably not going to be highlighted by the materialist mainstream medical industry, who they want to be the gatekeepers to that information. I'm glad he brought up the Kush weave as well, the black god. There's a lot of that when we look into the symbolism of coffee as well. So we'll get to that, but seeing how this is grape-like with racemosa, I wanted to throw out there that word ras, well, in Greek, the ancient Greek word for grape was like rax or ras or something like that. It would be rho alpha chi. So we would transliterate that to be like RAX, but it could also be RAS or RAZ or RAK, something like that. And that's pretty cognate with a lot of other languages, being that Persians called the word for vine raz or raz. The Etruscans, the precursor to the Italians and the Romans, they actually didn't call themselves Etruscans or Etrurians. They called themselves Rasenna. So this word ras has a lot of connection to the idea of wisdom, which is Ophiuchus, right? Ras, like think of the Ethiopian Rastafari, right? They call themselves Ras. That means that they're a learned elder or a wise one, something along those lines, if I'm not mistaken. So it's fascinating to see this correlation with the grape and the wise. So the Rasenna, the Etrurians, the people of the grape, or the people of the wise keepers of wisdom, something along those lines. They definitely had a thing with serpent-based augury. But check this out. This came up the other day. Okay. This is, they call it the Tomb of the Blue Demon. And this is dated to the 5th century BC, an ancient Etrurian tomb. And look at this figure here. You have 2 serpents. He's in the Ophiuchus pose, but he's blue, which connects him to like the Hindu deities and Shiva or other underworld deities. Very fascinating. So wanted to bring that into the weave as well. Even the way that the scales on the snake are depicted in this artwork, it really reminds me of how the grape-like element of this black cohosh. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, man.
Just wanted to add real quick, and this is going to be very obvious to some people, but Kundalini serpents, and it being depicted going up the spine, right? And the spine being just another, in my opinion, it's emblematic of the world axis, and because everything seems to be modeled off of that. And then every stem really being kind of a world axis symbol, in my opinion, as well, in that it's what I always say is that it's a bridge between heaven and earth. It aspires to go upward like Jacob's ladder, and so to me, all of that symbolism is just beautiful. As Ophiuchus relates to the color black, and I just want to riff on black real quick. I was blown away. I thought this was really intriguing. I was looking into Ophiuchus a couple weeks ago, I think, to prep for the David Matheson show. And I came across this guy who is a 13-sign astrologer. So he acknowledges Ophiuchus in his natal charts and things like that. And he's also an Egyptologist. And he went to Egypt, and he went to Dendera to see the Dendera zodiac. And there's different ways, right, of showing constellations. So you can have the actual disc, the wheel itself, the whole entire sky map of the heavens. But what he was showing was a portion of the temple where all of the constellations had their own little frame, and they were kind of like all sitting next to each other on the ceiling of this specific temple. And he was saying that this temple was used by common people for a long time as just a dwelling or a shelter before it got, I guess, renovated. And he was saying that there was so much soot all over the ceilings and walls that you really couldn't make out anything. And so apparently the Egyptian government or whomever took a long time to clean this temple, right? Because otherwise it was just all black. But there was one constellation whose soot, whose blackness they did not clean. And it was actually Ophiuchus. And so he has photos of it. He has video of it. He was saying that he understands the symbolism behind it. We're talking about it. And so he thinks that that's a direct nod Who was responsible for this? I'm not really sure. He doesn't know either. But that was the only portion of the whole entire ceiling that still had the black soot on it. It was Ophiuchus, the black one. So I thought that was pretty gnarly.
It makes me think of the death card for sure. You know, in the fifth deck card, because he's all black, shadowy, blacked out, wearing I think the helmet of Pluto in that card. That's pretty far out. And Dandara has the word Dan in Dandara. This again with this echo of this sacred tribe. Man, I'm looking forward to more on that.
And it would be silly not to mention that Krishna, another Ophiuchian type figure, that word in the Hindu actually means swarthy or black. So if we're going to connect the word Krishna to Christ or Christos, there's pretty good, I think, reason to do so. In fact, there's even symbolism in, I think, like the medieval period with Jesus with black doves, which is fascinating. The dove is definitely like a symbol correlate with Christ often. Dove in ancient Irish means black as well, which is Phoenician.
Cool.
Right.
That's really interesting, the black dove thing. I've never heard that before, but that conjures up some new connections and ideas.
Yeah, because there are no doves, at least that I know of, that are black in the world. So it's definitely encoding something.
Yes. We've kind of connected the dove to the corvus because the corvus is a crow, which is a black dove. I think there's an enigma resolution in that. But I've often thought of Ophiuchus as the dividing point. His legs are like scissors, like he could almost cut that snake in half if he takes that step forward. And then there's the divining of the divining. You know, you got to divide up the snake to look inside. So that's a dev of the divining of dividing up. I think that part of the divining process, they actually draw a rectangle in the sky, and then if a bird flies from certain directions, it's either good or bad depending on the direction. So that's another part of the divining. But Kyle, I'm so glad you found the tie-in to the dancing, to the tarantula, to the tarantula. That's so fascinating. We've seen that dancing plague kind of pops up throughout history. So just something in the backdrop that like only those in the know, like only the apothecarians would know that a dancing plague or tarantula reference might also have correspondence to Priapus. There's a particular spider that its poison gives you like a 48-hour boner. And so I think that those in the know would learn about the spider joke, and then it would be hailed in the news or in history, and it would be like an inside joke. And spiders kind of, there's like a giggle, like you laugh. So the falling out from laughter at the inside joke of this Priapus spider giving everybody boners is like almost a dancing plague from laughing at the joke. But then another thing, I think some of that dancing plague that has so many accounts that went for months and months. I have a rough theory that some of the artwork that depicted those people doing all these weird postures, like scratching each other's feet and laying out around in the city, I think there's a cipher. I found an alphabet cipher that is body language. And different body postures are actually different letters, and you could actually convey information in the painting by the different postures of the people's in the art. So there might be a there. I just wanted to say that's a rabbit hole. Maybe someday I'll get off the back burner.
Oh, somebody just put in the chat that there is a black cuckoo dove. That's cool.
Ooh.
Seems like it might be in the East. That might be why I've never heard of it. That's pretty sweet. I also just realized, to add to the weave, that, and go back to the Ophiuchus episode with Matheson for more information about Buddha and Ophiuchus being correlate. But Bood, if you put it backwards, dub is dove. So, and a lot of the ancient Buddha statues, a lot, same with the Osiris statues, you got a black Buddha or black Osiris. I never thought about that before, but there it is right there in the root of Bood. You got dub. You got to look at things forward and backwards. That's for sure. Good stuff, everybody.
For what it's worth, Kenneth Grant, he says that some occult groups will use the dove as a substitute symbol for Typhon, which that's a whole rabbit hole. But it's interesting because the OTO symbol has a dove on it as well, and it has a Eucharist, and it's putting it into a holy grail or a chalice or something along these lines, if I'm not mistaken. But I just have to mention this because spiders came up. A friend let me borrow a book, which I'm kind of working through right now. And I can't say I recommend it or anything else, but it's an intriguing weave, and it has to do with the 13th sign, this hidden 13th sign. So we're talking about Ophiuchus. That galactic alignment book was saying that the Pleiades has been looked at as a potential 13th sign as well, which I think it's interesting because they're kind of opposite each other. But this book right here is called Arachne Rising, and this guy is putting forth this hidden 13th sign as a spider. So Arachne Rising, the search for the 13th sign of the zodiac. Funny enough, the dates for someone who is a spider is opposite Ophiuchus. So there's some weird stuff going on here. I need to dig into it more, but I just wanted to put that on people's radar. It's very interesting.
Okay, can I go crazy for just a second? Oh, gosh. Okay. Oh my goodness. If they find a 13th sign and they call it the spider, that will be amazing. It might have been foretold. There might be some prophetic energy around the potential of that, if that comes to fruition. Friedrich Nietzsche has his one love interest, his main love interest, his main squeeze. He considered her much like Arachne. So in the realm of muses, Friedrich Nietzsche's love interest was playing the role of Arachne in his heart. So that is next level. And I found the adjustment card to correspond to Jean-Jacques Rousseau because Nietzsche called him the moral tarantula. Because of that nickname, I found Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose opening line is, every man is born free, but everywhere he goes, he is in chains. Yet those who would presume to control those men are in fact in chains more so themselves. So then I took that adjustment card and I put it on a tarantula's face, and I'm looking at a tarantula up close. So that would be so fascinating if they orient it towards, but that adjustment card is kind of free agent, Crowley freed it up and made it into something kind of more nebulous than it ever was before. So it'd be cool if that comes into play. And then one last thing on the dancing. If I say this phrase, get a leg up, isn't that mean dancing? Get a leg up means go dancing, right? It means like to be better than the other guy, really. But I think it implies dancing. So yeah, I think Ophiuchus's entire posture is very dance oriented. Just my,
the alleged gamma ray telescope, Fermi telescope, the NASA jokesters, they're such pranksters. They created or made up like in 2018, I think it was 21 new constellations that we can't see because we don't have their special fancy gamma telescope, but they put up there and a Godzilla, a obelisk, a Starship Enterprise, Little Prince, Hulk, Eiffel Tower, a TARDIS from Doctor Who, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, Albert Einstein, a Black Widow spider, quite a few more. But I thought that's what comes to mind for me is the when you talk about a spider constellation. NASA fairly recently made one up, and it's a Black Widow.
Can you link some of that in like the VibeRant call-in line? I'd love to dig through that.
Yeah, I'll
The
look that
Pope
up.
appointed 21 new cardinals. I would be interested if it corresponds to the cardinals. The cardinal dress code is correspondent to the academy, the school of the kids in the academy. It was a whole series came out recently. But yeah, it'd be interesting if the 21 new constellations correlate to the new appointed cardinals.
Okay, tangents aside. Oh man, this is a big one. Oh goodness. All
What's
right.
up, Salvia? I hope no one gets triggered because I know a lot of people have had not pleasant experiences with this plant. I would include myself in that, but I have a grander understanding of this plant now than from the first time I was imbibing in it or with it, which was a long time ago. And typically, a lot of people are given this plant to smoke. And one of the things I've learned about it over the years is that it actually doesn't want to be smoked. It wants to be eaten. The leaves want to be eaten or made into tea. And so this is Salvia divinorum. And kind of back to what Kyle was talking about with botanists changing names of plants. While researching this, this is also known as Salvia divinatorum, which now there's people that say that when it's the divinorum, it means the salvia of the ghosts. And the divinatorum is the salvia of the priests or sage of the diviners, which I thought was interesting. So I'm not 100% sure. Maybe you guys will know a little bit more what just the difference with a T, putting a T in there. So not sure. But anyway, that's something I wanted to bring to the table because I thought that was interesting when you're looking at it as salvia of the ghosts versus salvia of the priests or the diviners. So it kind of is a flip there. Which I think is interesting. So in Mexico, this is native to Mexico, specifically in Oaxaca, in the mountains of Oaxaca. And I found it really interesting as well that it typically only grows in that area, or it's very concentrated there. This is called La Pastora. Which translates to the shepherdess, which I think is interesting too, because she's like a herding plant. She wants to kind of bring you into her womb space. And I think that's more of the energy that's going on here because she's also associated with the Virgin Mary. Very feminine energy going on here. And also when you're looking at like the Aztec beliefs of the creation of plants. The order of this creation says that the father is tobacco, the mother is salvia, and the mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, are the children, which I found to be really interesting. And a lot of times, salvia is used in substitute for mushrooms. So if maybe they didn't have mushrooms around or something at that time, they would actually bring the salvia into these ceremonies because salvia does have the effects, it will take you into a different realm, really. And for those people who have used it in the way of smoking, you will be able to know that it does pull you out of this realm and it takes you somewhere else. And it can be terrifying. I had a pretty terrifying experience on it, in my mid-20s, and never wanted to do it again. But as I said, since then, I was gifted a plant of salvia. I grew it as a house plant for many years. And just last year, it kind of took a turn downward. So it wasn't doing so hot. So before I lost her entirely, I made a tincture out of it. And yesterday I imbibed in the tincture because it had been actually macerating for about a year. And I had to do it before the show because I was like, I need to find out more about her and learn the ways other than what I've already known about her. And I'll tell you that it was one of the more peaceful experiences that I've had in a while with a more psychedelic plant. And I ended up following the guidelines of how they like to harvest this plant, they only use the leaves, and they typically will harvest 26 leaves for a ceremony, and they'll harvest it in pairs of 2. So 2 pairs of 13 to equal the 26, which I found very fascinating, and another weave to go with the Ophiuchus theme here that we're talking about. And so I ended up just following the 26 drop. I took 26 drops of the tincture to kind of like, you know, marry those numbers together. And it was really peaceful. And one of the things that really came through was the connection to water, the connection to womb space. And one of the first sensations that I had was, you know, everyone usually knows what it feels like to tread water. You know, when you're just treading water, your head is kind of like bobbing up and down, and you're feeling the water hitting the back of your head, right at the top of your spine. That was where I got most of my sensations here. And I felt a constant rocking, like there was a motion of rocking, that I was being rocked by the water, by the ocean, which really brought me back to, again, that womb space, this mother aspect, going back to the primordial mother, visions of water coming onto the shore, like waves coming onto the shore, was another one that came through, but very grounding. I could see that this remedy could be used low dose for anxiety, someone that feels ungrounded, or someone that might need to be relaxed in a deeper way, but not in a relaxed way where you want to fall asleep. But when I kind of came out of the meditation, the biggest thing that came over me was the feeling of like I felt like I had just come out of a massage. And so anyone who's had a deep tissue massage knows how just relaxed you feel. Like every single muscle just feels relaxed. And that was the sensation that I got with this plant. And so when you're traditionally using it, if you were to go to curandera in Mexico, they would prepare this for you by rolling the leaves into like a cigar shape, and you would consume the leaf. And typically they'll sing and they'll chant, and tobacco is sometimes used as a smudge to open the space or clear the space. And you can find some pretty good videos on this where people are actually going and you know, honoring this plant traditionally, how it should be or wants to be consumed. It also really likes to grow in darker areas. It really loves water. It likes a lot of water. It likes a moist place. So that came back through with my experience. And it also, being in a darker area, reminds me kind of more of like just like a more sacred space in the forest, where you may have to like search this out. And if you watch some videos of people trying to go and find this plant, you're having to hike up into the mountains, and then all of a sudden you're just, oh, look at it all there. It's beautiful. And there's just tons of it. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting too, that this has been inverted for us here in the States, that, you know, a lot of people get it and they smoke it and it's just like, whoa, what the heck? And then it's all crazy and stuff like that. So I learned that aspect of it years ago from Terrence McKenna's brother, his name is escaping me. Dennis. Yeah, Dennis McKenna. We went to a talk that he gave in Portland years ago, and he talked about salvia and how it's not wanting to be smoked. It's actually a water plant. It wants to be utilized in water. And the other reason why they chew it is that it's our mucous membranes in our mouth that really kind of activates it, or what have you. And one of the other ways that they'll tell you to consume it is to not necessarily swallow, like hold the juices of the plant in your mouth as long as possible before you just start swallowing it. And yeah, it's a pretty magnificent plant. It's in the mint family. You can kind of see by this photo that it has a square stem. And I'd love to hear what Kyle has to say too, because I know that he's got some notes on salvia as well, and what everybody else has to say too.
Thanks. Yeah. I was just I have my Herb of the Week podcast, and I just did salvia a couple of weeks ago because it's the whole genus of sage. So we're talking about like garden variety sage and all the different types of burning sages. And of course I put a little thing about Salvia divinorum in there too. And so the thing about sage, you can go back actually, and I'll make another note of this in the VibeRant Telegram group. But we have a master list of all of the plants and all of the different signs, and you can look up sage from a year ago in Sagittarius. It's this plant of Sagittarius. So here we are in this like liminal space between Scorpio and Sagittarius in this salvia aspect, right? And the one thing that I was looking at too, and it was also a reference to Terence McKenna, and I have some feelings about him, and I'm just gonna not even talk about them that much, but I do think that some of his research is interesting. I do think that he's a seed driller, though, not a seed planter. But anyway, the thing he was in just, I don't know, a conference or something like that. And he was talking about this plant, and he was asking the local Huitzil, I don't know how you would pronounce Tzotzil, Huitzil people, what their native name for this plant is, and they said they didn't have one. They called it the Ojos de la Pastora, which is the eyes of the shepherdess, which is the Spanish name. And he thought that was, well, that's how intriguing. Wait, you have this plant that it's inconceivable that you've used this for centuries, right? And they're like, you don't have a name for it? Why don't you have a name for it? And that's because they claimed that their grandfathers were the first to use it. In other words, this plant just like came up. It's just like, it maybe the time was right for, the age change or something like that. At least that's the idea that's presented with Terence McKenna's work on this subject. And I thought that was pretty interesting. To me, it goes along with the idea of like, if a ground is fertile, then something will, if a terrain is hospitable, then something will come along and claim that space. And so if the psychic terrain becomes more hospitable, then something like salvia might present itself. But yeah, that's the only thing that I wanted to say about that. I don't have any recommendations on the usage of this plant, but I do think it's a sage. And so sages are medicinal, as as you could tell by the name salvia, which is savior, salvation, salve, the heals the wounds, and so on. Those are my thoughts.
Salvia, it actually literally means sage in Latin. Interesting that you have your sage of the zodiac, Sagittarius, right next to Ophiuchus, who is holding the serpent. That root, salve, and serp are philologically connected, in my opinion, anyway. I think in Dylan Sicocio's opinion as well. He wrote about this in God's Acre for Winds of the Soul. Because servo, it's interesting too, how servo means to save, as does salve, like salvation or salvator. But servo can also relate to a slave. So in slave, you have the same phonetics there again as salve. It just the L and A kind of get moved around. So there's this interesting thing going on about like maybe the sage is someone who is in service, or the higher self when activated is also where we find our true ability to be of service to the world. Something along those lines. Maybe that was the point of a sage, was someone who serves in a sacred sense, in a healing medicinal sense. I really like considering all the fun philology right there in that SALV, SERP, doing the letter swaps as they are possible and appropriate. And that's all right there in the sky clock at this one point as well, kind of piled up in this mystical lead up to the winter solstice, where it's a time where service is absolutely imperative to saving some people in the ancient world. The haves and the have-nots were probably a much more noticeable distinguishment, right? In a world without grocery stores and modern conveniences, maybe you did have to go to the temple and and ask, how can I serve so that you can save me? What can I do to get some grain right now?
Right, right. I love this connection with the shepherdess and La Pastora and the Virgin Mary. And so it just reminds me of the fact that Virgin, the Virgin Mary has a huge correspondence with Virgo, right? The Virgin, the maiden, the stellar Virgin. And the card that corresponds with Virgo is the Hermit. And in my opinion, it really seems as though the Hermit was a former shepherd, and that a lot of the symbolism with the Hermit card and his vigilance has to do with him being a shepherd, a guide of souls, right? And so the Virgin Mary, she's been, and I know this is more of a modern thing, but she's been referred to as Stella Maris, the star of the sea. And this is a reference, in my opinion, to the North Star, and her being the guiding star for Christ, and the North Star being everybody's guiding star. It's your true north. It's getting you back to your sacred center. And so this shepherdess concept, I think, is really, really fascinating. And I believe L.C. King, he's done some research where there has been a correspondence with the 7 stars of the North being related to sheep, and that it's 7 sheep. And this just reminds me of all of this business right here. So I think it's really, really interesting and fascinating. And I liked hearing your experience too. You told me a little bit about it, but you really went in depth here.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I'll have more reports about it, because I'm going to experiment, because I could tell that I took like the 26 drops, but if you were to do a higher dose, it would take you to a place, and it's pretty cool to just know that it's more pleasant than what I think people might have experienced in some other way, how they've consumed it in the past or whatever. So
yeah,
it'll be fun to experiment.
Definitely. And then Christ, of course, being the Lamb of God, as well, and all of the shepherd symbolism stuff that I completely just fell in love with this past Virgo season. It's really interesting.
Oh, and one other thing I think about, just with the dark element of Ophiuchus and black, and what we're talking about, is that this is typically like when they do a salvia ceremony in Mexico, it's going to be a nighttime ceremony. So it's typically done at night, because I think we're going into those dark spaces. She's herding you back into to like have a place of reflection. And I think that has something to do with the water element as well. Just the emotions, reflections, really like looking at yourself, looking at your life. I think that salvia would be a really good companion for doing that kind of darker work, if you're wanting to go in that space too.
Which is feminine.
Totally.
The inner world where you encounter the higher self is first you got to go through the black part, closing your eyes. I want to throw up one more log on the philology fire real quick, Gabe, that Micmac pointed out sage and Saka. If you do the G and C switch, sage can be Saka. Saka or Zaka, that's, I think, related to the idea of the Saxons, Saxa, Sase, all that. And of course, a saga is what the sages tell you. They're the keepers of stories as well, the priesthood. But look at this word here that the Mexican people, ancient Mexican people in their culture coming out of Oaxaca, this word spelled Oaxaca. Well, right there in the middle of Oaxaca is, I know they pronounce it different than what it looks like it's spelled. So this might not be a solid connection, but I see it in there that Xaca, that's Zaka or Saka, which is same word, because you can switch these letters to get saga or sagax, sage. It's definitely there. Whether or not there's a connection to the same universal proto-Buddhism system, you'll have to check out Terminalia, the 6th Spirit World book by Dylan Sakosho. That'll give you an idea. I think the answer is yeah, there's a connection.
Nice. Man, what a bounty to feast upon here. So I love the idea of this being the shepherdess. Buwotes is the shepherd in my perspective. The entire the story of the ring of Gyges is Boötes going into Corona Borealis. And if he had a sweetheart or a darling, beloved female shepherd counterpart, it would be right here next to him with Ophiuchus. So that does make a nice female shepherd in a fun way. And Ophiuchus has that affinity for animals. You know, this is a very much a St. Francis kind of energy too, the whisperer to animals. But there's a long weave around this correspondence between savior and you're a slave. It's almost like if you need a savior, then you're a slave to your savior. Be careful of what you believe in because your knowledge becomes your own captor. The Greeks believe that reading literacy, to read words, to be inspired, is actually to take in a spirit, and then you are serving the spirit. And that's why you're compelled to say the words the way you do. So reading, literacy itself, the art of the poet, is the art of the serving class. And this is weird. This is hard to even fathom, but they actually considered themselves too good to read. And so to be literate, it's a total flip of how we think of it, a total flip. They thought that reading was for the servants. And so they would literally have servants do the literacy, because to take in a spirit and obey what it tells you is weakness. And that's why you're a slave. If you believe what you think you know, you become a slave to your own knowledge. It's such a mental inversion, and it's perfect for Boötes. Boötes is the void. You have to get out of your way to let the spirit fill you so that you become the poet of Boötes, the conduit. So it's really, and there is Ralph Ellis, who I don't back everything he says, but he does have an interesting weave around the word shepherd. In Egyptian is a mistranslation. You got to flip the hook, and the hook in one direction is a shepherd. The hook in the other direction means captured. And isn't it fascinating that it's philologically translates into English? They weren't even saying the same mouth noises. The glyph for captured and shepherd is almost the same. And here we are in another language. And even the sounds in English, captured and shepherd, are almost the same. And you're literally flipping one little piece of the puzzle. And these correspondences, I think the reason why these opposites seem so close, the enantiodromia of it all over time, chance, is because the Greeks considered literacy the art, the techne of a slave. And that's a great lesson for us today with be careful what you read, be careful what you consume, be careful what you take in, because you become a servant or a slave to your beliefs. And then Valis, I can't let Salvia and its reputation come into this room without mentioning Philip K. Dick and the Valis that's the anagram hiding out in Salvia. And I love, Michelle, I love how you kind of knew that there was already a reputation when you were going to tell this story. You're like, get ready, everybody. It might be a trigger. And the concept of Valis and the whole Gnostic movement is kind of riding on this common wave that a lot of people know, that feeling, that sense of something way bigger than you. And maybe you went on a shamanic journey and you bit off more than you could chew. But then Valis, of course, brings in the T-Mobile pink that is a touchstone of society. And are we at 2 hours yet? Can I say magenta? One more. Okay, one more last thing. Terence McKenna, what a perfect correspondence for the salvia aspect, this kind of a psychopomp in his own right of a whole entire culture. Guess what I learned? Jordan Peterson took his job. Jordan Peterson wore the same shoes as Terence McKenna. I think that was in his Harvard capacity. He wore the exact same hat. And isn't that a fascinating weave? I would think Terence McKenna is like a Ophiuchian kind of persona. Jordan Peterson, whatever he calls himself, he's totally Orion on the other side of the zodiac, 180 degrees from Terence McKenna. They're yin-yang in each other.
Mic drop. Here we go.
Ooh, I bet you wondered how I knew it. Hey, I got one for you. What do you call the sect of Dionysian priests that eat grapes but they don't drink wine. Anyone? Chewbacca's. They probably have a fur costume and everything, right? So
Did you make that up? I always said I wanted dad jokes on VibeRant as often as possible. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. I'll think of another topic so I could come back with some. All right. So here's the grapes. Yeah, grapevine. What an awesome plant. What an amazing plant in its own right. Aside from grapes, aside from purple stuff, we could just talk about the virtues of the actual vine, of the plant, of the leaves. But why not? Let's just cover it all. So I think this is a really good example of an Ophiuchus herb ally, because the alchemist of old, they used to refer to the grape that it was the pinnacle of the plant kingdom. Like that all the other plants, all they wanted to do was aspire to be step out and go above with the grapes. And that's because the grapes with wine distilled the spirits. It provided them the alchemical substance to extract the medicinal virtues of these plants. And they surrendered, all the other plants, they surrendered their essences to the living water, which is the wine, as a carrier. So it's carrying the virtues of these other plants in wine. And then eventually when wine started becoming distilled, then it was high proof alcohol, which is brandy and other spirits, right? And that's why this is the vine of transmission of energy to, I think, the plant spirits. They all think about it like, oh, I wish are we going to hang out with grape today? I hope so. And so let me paint a picture about the ecological role of grapes in the wild. So grapes they have these big old vines, and they're like serpents, and they kind of grab onto trees. And there's other vines in the wild, and they like to hang next to trees, and they want to go up tall, and they'll hang out with trees like poison ivy and Virginia creeper and stuff like that. And they have a symbiotic relationship with the trees, but the grapes don't. These are the grapes of wrath. They're there to pull the trees down. Why? Because ecologically, what they want to provide is a liminal habitat for an opening in the forest for opportunistic plants that want to live in a place where it's kind of like, it's like dredging up the sunlight in a weird way. It's like creating that interesting breaking free of the boundary, ecologically speaking. And it does that also in an alchemical way when the grape is transmuted into wine. The leaves, classical shaped leaf, I think most people could recognize a grape leaf. They're a really quality astringent plant. So astringent plants are really helpful for the stomach. They tone the stomach and help the stomach. You can, if you have wild grapes in your area, most people do, you can learn to find them. There's another plant that looks like grapes. It's called Canadian moon seed, and the botanical name is Minispermum, which I think is a funny botanical name. That's one where I think the botanists are laughing on that one. But anyway, I guess the best way to determine the grapes from the poison lookalike is wherefore you shall know them by their fruits. That's the best way. So anyway, there's another dad joke for you, I guess. So the leaves you can take and you can steam them, and you can use them to wrap up rice, and that's what you use to make a dolma, or you can put them in some apple cider vinegar, and they're really nice, just pickled, yummy, antioxidant rich. The tendrils have they look like a serpent tongue. It's like this little red serpent forked tongue. Definitely signatures of the snake there too, with the vines and the serpent tongue. At the last portion, that's kind of like feeling out around to see what it can grab onto. Those are one of my favorite trail snacks. You take some of those and chew them up. They're really high in vitamin C, just like the rest of the plant. And they always have different flavors. So you can kind of really get a good feeling about your landscape just by tasting the grapevines as you walk from, one end of the trail to the other. You could taste all the different varieties of why a grapevine would taste so sweet in this place and bitter in this place and sour in this place, and kind of get an idea of like where the sun is providing and where the soil is like. It's all right there in the serpent's tongue that's offering itself to you, basically. And then, of course, there's this white substance that is formed at the bottom of the cask when it's being fermented into wine, and that's a potassium salts. That's called tartar, cream of tartar, named after the Greek word for hell, which is pretty interesting, right? And that's a very interesting substance too in its own right. There's a lot to talk about with that. Of course, the grapes. Everyone knows them by the grapes. Grapes are really high in vitamins. There's this grape diet that is really famous in Europe, where basically if somebody's on the edge of dying and there's really not much hope for them at all, they could send them to a vineyard and let them eat grapes and have their nibbles of the tendrils as well, and maybe eat and drink good water. And that's a good way to bring people back from the depths of their own health. Let's see here. Grape seeds, when you crush them into oil, that's like one of the most penetrating oils that there is. It goes really, really deep into the skin. So adding some of that to a salve or to a healing oil will really go down and affect the organs on a more organ layer. I have another slide. The next slide over, I think, is one that shows the vine. And so you could see here, even like kind of the signatures of the constellation itself, how an old vine just looks like it's holding up a serpent, right? It's bearing it. And then in the case of the serpent being like benevolent, maybe it is the good guy because that serpent is bearing all of this wonderful fruit that is, lots and lots and lots of fruit. So there's this one looks like a really old grapevine, and the older the grapevines, the deeper down they go, the more minerals they pull up, the more ratio they have of tension on the surface of the berry, which is an important thing to keep the berries from not fermenting. From this, you get wine, you get jelly, jams, vinegars. That's a whole nother group of medicines right there, extracting things in vinegars. The wines have like a heating effect on the body. Vinegars have a cooling effect on the body, moistening. So it can change dependent upon how the preparation of the plant. And then the plant itself is the carrier, is the actual carrier for all these other, the spirit and the essence of these other plants. And then there's so much to think about too. I think even just like the Bacchus aspect and the Eucharist aspect. What's his name? Hegel. I was reading recently about Hegel thinking about talking about this as like a focal point of dialectics, and in that you have the berry, which is the other, and then when you crush it and the berry no longer has its form, and then you take it into yourself, and when you consume the spirits of nature, that is like participating in the rites of Bacchus and the rites of give them bread and wine and stuff like that with Ceres. Whereas if you think of the berry as being the transmutation of the actual spirit of the blood of Christ, then by consuming it, it is not you consuming the plant, that the consumption is now you being consumed by spirit. And so this is something that I was reading with Hegel, and it's a little over my head, but that's the best I can do of like explaining at least what I think he was coming from with that, being the grape being a focal point of Hegelian dialectics, so to speak, and the real true Hegelian dialectics, not the word Hegelian, not the buzzword Hegelian dialectics. But yeah, there's a lot more to say about grapes, but I'd love to hear. Let me pass the bottle around and see what it tastes like on the other side.
Well, let's pass the Vitus stick.
Yeah.
Because that's what the Vitus is, the vine staff, or they called it, I think the Etrurians or the Etruscan litus. But basically it's what the officers in the Roman legions would have, this staff that was for beating their subordinates when they weren't doing what they're supposed to do. But speaking of etymology in Latin, one of the Latin words for grape, maybe the main one, is uva, which is interesting that they named the layer of your eyeball after you peel off the outer layer of your eyeball and you're left with this sort of reddish, purplish, grape looking thing. They call it the uvea, which is based on that Latin word for grape. So I think in the doctrine of signatures, there's some reason to expect that grapes might have some good qualities for your eyesight, connecting us back to that idea of seeing far or prophecy. Is that true, Kyle? Grapes good for your eyes?
Yeah, they're some of the best. Eyes they look like the alveoli, so it's good for the lungs. It also kind of looks like the shape of a heart, like the true shape of a heart. So it is a blood, and it's just a deep restorer on the watery parts of the body for sure.
Well, and I like the aspect of.
I got some.
Sorry.
Fun.
Go ahead, Slick.
After you go ahead.
Okay. I love that you brought up. Thank you. I love that you brought up the fact that when somebody was like really, really ill, that they were taken to a vineyard. And I'll say I was just I gravitated towards grape during the summer when I wasn't feeling well. And luckily we grow grapes here, but I would literally just go to the vines and I was like, this is my medicine right now. Like it was all I wanted to eat when I was trying to mend my ear ailments. And I was just out there every single day. And I'm like, these grapes are medicine. And so that was really interesting. That helped to like kind of close a weave for myself. And just being able to grow grapes and learn about them and watch them and see their habitat and what they like. I also think of like Pan in a way. And there's this merriment sort of thing, this overtaking nature of the grape. And wine is also merriment, and you can have, you can cheers each other and, celebrate and stuff like that. So I always think of Pan with it. So I also think that goes back to that like deep root, the kind of like twisted trunks of the grape and just their wild nature, which is really, really nice to think about as well.
I like grapes. Our grapes are good. No, I don't have anything symbolically to share. Great information, Kyle. Other than, one evening I was hankering for some grapes and I went out and I started picking grapes, and it just felt so Edenic. It was like bountiful. I felt the abundance. It was like palpable. It was really this amazing sort of experience. I remember I came inside, I was all excited and stuff. Yeah. I was just completely surrounded by grapes, and I don't know, it just felt pretty like magical, actually. So that was like at the height of when they were really like just lush and available for us. So anyways, once I found out that Kyle was doing grape, I was like, oh, that is perfect. And I'm so glad you pointed out the whole idea just aesthetically of, the serpent and then what the vines look like and, all of that. That's really, really cool. So excellent choice.
We could go
a
whole show just about the symbolism of grapes in the zodiac. So I think we'll maybe avoid opening too much into that and try to keep it focused on the Ophiuchian aspects. But there is something like that with the fermentation of the grape and how it's a carrier for the strength and power of the sun. you know, in the Bible, especially the astrotheology refers a lot to the the fury of the Lord and pouring out the cup of fury and all kinds of things like that, or sort of wine type references. And of course we know that like the Bacchanalian madness is an element of drunkenness, you know, the going ham as they do. It's funny that we even say going ham, and that's like saying going dark, going dark with it. My point being, though, that whenever you do this fermentation, you're taking the height of the sun, which is when the grapes ripen in Leo season, the sun's fury, and you're storing that. You're like almost in a psychopomp type sense. You're carrying that or ferrying that into a different time of year, so that you can, in the underworld season or in the winter, you can ingest the power and strength of the height of the sun back when it was in like Cancer and Leo season when those grapes were ripening. You see what I mean? So it's like, in a way, the wine does definitely become a type of underworld enlightener, or it makes your journey through the underworld part of the year a little less dark, maybe.
Yeah, man. One thing that just occurred to me thinking as we're weaving here, the alcohol, a lot of these healing elements have a strong number 3 on the Enneagram. It's often a doctor or a remedial cure-all. It's the Hanged Man card, which says a lot, right? But I'm thinking about the number 3 being indicated by it's the first triangle possible with 3 spheres, 3 circles, which is the symbol for therefore. But 3 circles is the first triangle that you can form. And so it is kind of apropos that the grape and the wine fall into this triangular sacred number 3 aspect. But I love that you mentioned Hegel, Kyle. I just heard recently about Hegel's thing with wine. And I think he has a quote where he says, tell me if this rings familiar with what you read, that you can actually taste meteor showers in the vintage. So like the time of year that it's harvested corresponds to certain meteor showers. Do you remember hearing anything about that from Hegel? No? Yeah. That was next level wizardry as far as I'm concerned. Quite a quote. But with Hegel, I've mentioned this before. People are talking about, he didn't say problem, reaction, solution. He said synthesis, thesis, antithesis, whatever, some version of the Trinity. But I love to keep the PRS close to Hegel because the printing press did come from where he got published. And the PRS is problem, reaction, solution. But now we're bringing the wine press into the picture as well. And there is really something, they vilified the printing press thoroughly early on. They turned that thing into like a dark satanic mill in its time because it was a rebel agent, a faction, a tool for the rebels to rebel rouse. But isn't it kind of interesting that the wine, okay, so a culture, they go through a collapse, and so does their press, their media, the people that they trust to tell them what's going on in the world. And so the wine press is like a vintage of a culture, of an era, as is the printing press, is like keeping track of the turning of an age. I think William Blake used to talk about cultures as vintages, different vintages of time. And then I wanted to mention that grape and purge, it's a rough anagram, but it goes in as a grape, but it might come out as something else. So the purge of the grape is a nice, fun in and out anagram. And then the last thing is the song, I heard it through the grapevine, right? That's what you're doing when you're tasting those vines. You're like taking in the mineral information along the path, sampling as you progress through the forest to gain more and more like layers of info. Dude, that's so gorgeous. But I want to point out the rest of those lyrics is, I'm just about to lose my mind. There is the Bacchanalian frenzy. The frenzy has to stay in the story. You can't go talking Bacchanalia magic without reminding people about almost losing your mind. You know, that's that first sip from the communion. I often think that the Catholic Church was like testing people's ability to abstain every Sunday. It's like, oh, no drinking, no drinking, but here's a sip. Let's see how well you do tonight.
Of taking some sort of intoxicant.
Can you start that over? Your mute delayed,
Thanks for the heads up. Appreciate it. Yeah. Just said that's really interesting. We've talked about this before, the idea of humans' souls when they come here symbolically, this is the mythology, taking an intoxicant that causes amnesia, so you don't recall your past life. And if I'm not mistaken, wine has been used as a metaphor for this, liquid that you're drinking, imbibing in, to lose your mind, or rather lose your memory, pretty much. So that's what it reminded me of. But all this grape discussion just reminds me of home because the Central Valley in California, I mean, there's just vineyards all over the place. And then, during the summer, picking the grapes and then letting the grapes, bake under the sun to turn into raisins, right? And then there's the passageway to get from Central California to LA. You have to cross through a place called the Grapevine as well. So anyway, just making me homesick a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah, man. You're making me a little homesick for the fields. You drive through those fields and you turn sideways in the car, and the rows just mesmerize you. As a child, I used to just love to stare at that hypnotic effect of the fields flashing by your eyes. And somehow I was imbibing in a hypnotic engagement with the agriculture, and I think a lot of kids have done that too. That's kind of a fun, I don't know, an intoxicant in its own right.
We got that in Missouri too. We have, you might not know this about Missouri, but it is a huge wine producer. We have vineyards all over it. They actually grow great here. So they have a really nice grape patch at the park that I took Kyle to one time when he was visiting. So yeah, I don't know how much they produce, but I think it's on a very, very high level. So popping up to, oh goodness. Oh my God. Oh shit. We're talking about ayahuasca next. All right, Michelle, take us away.
All right.
Because if grapes weren't intoxicating enough, let's just take it all the way.
Yeah.
I saw ayahuasca on the slides. That's why I wore this shirt today.
I was gonna say, yes, good call on that one. That's ayahuasca vibes. When Mario and I were talking about plants for this one, and we were sitting in the living room and talking about Ophiuchus, and I was just like, you know what? I think ayahuasca would be a pretty good Ophiuchus plant because it is also a vine. And Kyle and I had also talked, previous, and he was bringing up grapes, and I was like, well, ayahuasca is also a vine, so that felt like a weave to follow. So here we have ayahuasca, Banistereopis copy. Maybe Kyle can say that better than I can. But
Banistereopsis.
Thank you, sir. This is also known as soul vine. So that's how I remember hearing about ayahuasca, and it was called soul vine. And I thought, holy moly, that's pretty cool. That seems pretty deep. I will say I have not imbibed in ayahuasca yet at this point in my life, but I have talked to a handful of people who have. I've researched it myself, and we have a really close friend that has a couple stories that I actually thought I'll weave into this one as well, because there's also a snake correspondence going on here. I mean, when you just look at the plant itself and the vine, how it's vining up this tree, look at that thick knotting, that DNA shape that we were talking about earlier is all up in here.
Don't people see serpents when they're on ayahuasca?
Yes, and that's what one of our friends talked about. She's done it a handful of times, and she said on a few occasions her trip consisted of her falling into a pit of snakes, and she could not get out of it, and it was just snakes everywhere all over her, and it was quite terrifying, she said, but that was a theme that ran through that trip for her. So this is commonly paired with another plant, which is also in the coffee family, which I thought was another weave that we're going to explore because coffee is coming through here. And that is usually, they use the leaf combined with the ayahuasca. And what I learned about that is that leaf of the chacaruna plant, it contains DMT. So does ayahuasca. But what the leaf does is it blocks off the receptors in our brain that would actually turn off the DMT. So like if you just took ayahuasca on its own, from what I'm learning, you wouldn't actually get much of a DMT experience. But when they're adding these other plants, when it pairs together, that's what will bring this DMT sort of chemical attribute through.
Yeah, DMT is in almost all things that you would ingest, but we have these alkaloids. They are monoamine oxidase inhibitors in our gut. So when we're digesting things that we eat or drink, it basically neutralizes the DMT so that we're not just constantly tripping. But yeah, what you're talking about is interesting. The ayahuasca decoction combining the leaf and the vine together. It's very cool. I've never tried it.
Yeah, I thought so too. And there's other plants that they'll sometimes combine with it, but this is the most common one. Again, we're going to a night journey medicine. So typically ayahuasca is consumed at night. A lot of times you hear about ayahuasca being consumed in a group setting, but it can also be done individually. And what I also learned was that the shaman who will prepare an individual's ceremony, they will also sometimes drink the brew as well, and their role for this ceremony will be to be able to envision and see the illness in the person that is wanting to be brought to the surface, which I thought was really interesting and really cool, because I've always wondered, why is it that if you do an ayahuasca ceremony, you have to be in a room of like 30 people? To me, that doesn't sound like something I would want to do if I would be in a room of 30 people and have an ayahuasca experience, I suppose. But I've always wondered, why is it that that's what's commonly told, that you need to be in this group setting? But I think probably more in a traditional sense of it being used, I think it may have been probably used more of a one-on-one or in a smaller group setting to actually get to really, really deep stuff. If you had a specific ailment or a specific trauma or something that you were really wanting to work with, I would almost wonder if it would be more beneficial to do it with in a smaller setting with a one-on-one, situation or something. Just a thought that I had as I was researching this. So typically you're going to hear about the grandmother energy and wisdom that comes through with ayahuasca, which I thought was a good pairing again, with the things we're talking about with salvia as well. And that mother energy, this primordial dark energy of the womb space, typically going back to these spaces are going to bring up a lot of things for us. So most people who've heard about ayahuasca, that it's going to bring up old memories, old traumas. Lots of people use this for, PTSD. You're wanting to move past something. This is one of the medicines that you commonly hear people, going to places like Peru, Brazil, South America to consume this medicine. And I also, too, wanted to, one thing I'll say that I learned that I thought was interesting. So kind of like with salvia, what Kyle brought up, how people were saying like, this plant kind of just like popped up. We didn't really know what it was or where it really comes from. And ayahuasca kind of has a similar thing going on. And I learned that the Brazilians believe that King Solomon imparted his knowledge for ayahuasca to be paired with the other plant, the chacaruna plant. And so there's also people that say that the knowledge of ayahuasca and the blending of the plants just came from the plant spirits themselves, that it was just imparted on the people through the plants. So it was kind of like this divinely imparted information on the communities where this is natively grown, which I thought was really beautiful and awesome. And I'm sure I could see Gabe. I see you, King Solomon, I'm sure popped off a few things. That's why I wanted to remember to bring that up, because I knew you guys would have something to bring to the table with that one.
There's actually a King Solomon is said to, there's like a million myths about coffee, right? And this other plant that mixes with the Banisteriopsis to create ayahuasca is coffee related. One of the myths about coffee's origin was that King Solomon was taught to use it by Archangel Gabriel.
Ah, I like that. Nice. Well,
yeah, I like to elevate. I definitely like to elevate.
And the thing you're talking about, the Unio do Vegetal, the ayahuasca church, is founded by a guy named Gabriel.
Ah, interesting.
And he's the one who says that like King Solomon psychically connected with them across time or something, and was like, you have to establish this order that it's all very interesting.
Okay, I'm going to give
Gabriel
everybody
gets
a
around.
chance in the. I do, man. I get around. I'm going to give you guys the secret of my success, though. If you spell my name in an anagram, starting with the letter I, you'll find that there is a word we still use. You have to misspell it. You're breaking the spell by spelling it with an I. Gabriel, starting with an I. I'll let the chat play around with the anagrams, and you'll see the secret to my success. This is how I got around all these years. I am tripping, y'all. I'm tripping. Michelle, you're so awesome. What a perfect choice.
So are you. Yeah.
This really, yeah, you brought us to the precipice here. You really have. I am stunned at the scientific name being Caapi. Caapi. Like of all the places and all the internet and all the years that people are going to look for shit to think about, they would never find it anywhere but here with this group of wonderful souls we've brought together. That the ayahuasca Caapi was a communion. We partook of the fall of a person, and it brought us together. We came together because of that person's demise. So for Caapi to be a word that is scientifically, remember, science is a seance, is ventriloquism, speaking to the dead. And there's the name Caapi in the scientific name at the end of that. Chance, you remember the first time you interviewed me on your show, buddy? I read my Isaac Caapi poem.
We've got a lot of miles on the road since then. I actually don't remember that. Gosh.
Okay.
Way back when our very first hang.
Yes. It's a kind of a long poem. Can I read it? Do you guys mind? I'll be very quick. I'd rather do it now than at the end because it's kind of dark, so we can end on a positive note. But I think it's important for the ayahuasca. You know,
if you're feeling called, I think you should. Gabe poetry is always a treat.
So about the coffee, also before we move away from that,
we're not going to move away
has
from
the shape of a coffin.
We're going to move closer to it.
Yeah, we are. We're moving into it, right? Yeah. So his constellation has a coffin in the shape of his torso, and I believe that the Osiris story, Isis, in the details, like the fine details, Osiris's final piece is bound up in a tree in the shape of an obelisk, and she has to trick this community to give her the tree. She does a deed to get the tree, but the obelisk shape of that last piece is, I think, also the coffin that is the shape of Ophiuchus. And whether coffins are shaped that way because of the constellation or not is a fascinating thing to ponder. It is ergonomic, but it is also very stellar, the shape of the coffin. Just saying. Okay, I'm going to read this poem and I'll be quick. Hang in there with me. This is a culmination of Ophiuchus for me. I was trying to bring to bear a long time ago the things I thought I knew way back then about Ophiuchus, but it is because of what happened to Isaac Cappy. Looking at Isaac Cappy led me to the Judas Iscariot, that led me to the scapegoat ritual that is Ophiuchus, that I then incorporated John Wilkes Booth and all the other Ophiuchus scapegoats throughout, as many as I could fit on a couple pages of poetry here. Okay. Very wordy, very clunky. This is not, it's not very graceful. This is definitely supposed to be like driving a flat tire. Okay. Isaac Cappy skywalks like Wilkes Booth into the 13th house of Judah. That's my title. 12 men once sought to center heaven and earth around one beloved begotten son. Cast out of their midst for his Scorpio Iscariot namesake kiss of betrayal was the infamous Judas. Without lifting his pointing finger, a fratricidal public display of affection was his foregone transgression, weighing down his left-handed choice with that unredeemable bloodied sack of coin. Exiled to wilderness, Judas's suicide branch proved his guilt-broken fate, initially managing to not die from the knots of his own faulty noose. Only after his fall into his progeny's burial field, paved with bloodied soil and red coin, he passed into future multitudes of the unclean. Then in the spell, the innards betwixt his staggered legs did consecrate and join those there departed. If anybody doesn't remember the Judas death scene, his entrails spill between his legs, just like Ophiuchus has the serpent between his legs. I'm only going to read a couple more pages or paragraphs because it is heavy. Thus he transmutes into the exiled 13th zodiacal figure, Ophiuchus. Known as the snake charmer, here the long-forgotten pariah escapes the 12 forms of man, with his back turned on earthly realms. In his left hand, Ophiuchus pins down the blazing red eyes and white teeth of his renowned scaly nemesis, and with an uprisen right hand, he utilizes the serpent's own razor-sharp tail as a knife to break open the galactic void. Having succumbed to this serpent tamer's will, the sacrificially vanquished Draco spills open a perpetual stargate between the hero's offset legs as the departing constellation leaps off the sky clock, and with a left heel in this world, ever pierced on the scorpion's tail, and his twilit right foot breaking forth into the other world, Ophiuchus is immortalized in mid-stride. Not unlike when well-known John Wilkes Booth walked in both worlds, when under reptilian charms he ventured a momentous aerial salt right out of Lincoln's faithful booth into the many publicly staged eyes. The night Abe died, John W., the actor, was in the assassination's act of escaping, when his own left riding spur proved Achilles' heel by becoming entangled on that newly starred, red-stained, soon unredeemable treasury flag. With a dramatic tumble, John's left hip seemed broken, yet he rose again to thrust his right-handed blade high and boast of his tyrannicide in Latin. His exit was then occulted by stage curtain. The 12-day round-the-clock manhunt which ensued started with a bullet in Abe's elongated skull and ended in the lucrative scapegoating of some twice-dead fella with a coinciding broken limp who perished in the crossfire of the mob while leaping poorly out of a burning leather hide curing Booth. I'll stop there. It's
Dude, that was
amazing how much of our history is actually in the stars. It's actually just in the stars. And they just redress it. It's like a stage that changes colors, kind of, but stays the same shape.
beautiful. That was a really great weave with all this, all the lessons that we've talked about today. It reminded me of how the word, we're talking about ayahuasca, talking about grape, vine, divine, divinity, but also cutting off of the vine, divine, like as in you are pruning it off. So here we have the scapegoat escaping, being pruned off, in order to, I don't know, strengthen the rest of the crop. It's just a story that plays off over and over, but it's also in that word, if you, depending on how you spell it, Devine or Divine. Like you are taking it off of the vine, just as in the case of Wilkes Booth and the other guy.
That's what we're here to do. I think humanity's role in nature is that the the vine that chokes the tree might not have any defense against that. You know, we can see where there may be some imbalance creeping into the equation. We can help nature do what it would have done anyway in a balancing sense, but because maybe we're more efficient if we're working with nature, we can exalt nature, right? I think that might be part of where this divine idea comes from. The world tree, the one life, right? Well, if there's one life that emanates all of our smaller lives, like branches and twigs off of a great trunk or a great world tree, then we may always be in some way working with and occasionally working against this vine wrapped around the tree or the serpent wrapped around Yggdrasil, that whole thing. It even when it's destructive, it serves creation, but we're dancing with that thing. It's always part of the equation.
Yeah, you know, I've been imagining it lately too. Obviously, I have a great reverence for the concept of a world tree, but I keep on thinking about a world or cosmic river, and instead of branches, it's just smaller streams branching off from each other, but there's a main stream, right? Kind of like the trunk of a tree. And so that's kind of been going through my mind. And then even too, it just reminds me of Ophiuchus and Ophiuchus holding the serpent and just like the undulation of a wave, you know, of water, you know, and then the serpent itself also just being kind of just a symbol as well of frequency and just vibration purely, you know. And so him holding literally the vibration of life or whatever, the sine wave of life, right? The ups and downs, peaks and valleys, all that kind of stuff. But I believe, did you have more to go on for your slide here?
Just a few more things, yeah. Just a couple more. But we had a second, if you go to the next slide. So I just wanted to showcase the chakaruna plant. And then the connection to I think it's really interesting and cool, the connection to the coffee family. And we see the berries here. And then on the right, you see the brew that they're making. So you are stripping the vine apart and then brewing it up with the leaf. And one of the things I wanted to touch on with the ayahuasca that I've heard, you know, and maybe you guys have heard this too, but if you listen to people who research ayahuasca, and it makes me wonder about the group setting thing with this kind of stuff, because there is also a darker side to these things, to some of these retreats that people go on. There's stories of women being sexually assaulted by the people who put on these events, and you're in a vulnerable place. And the thing that always makes me wonder about this kind of stuff is when you're consuming something like this, you're so wide open, and it can be a good thing, and it can also be taken advantage of by the people that, you know, want to take advantage. And so there's like a whole line of research that's been done on this aspect of it, or people who've come up and talked about this. Another thing I think is interesting that's usually talked about in this respect of, like, you know, we have this want to go to other cultures to have these mind altering experiences. And sometimes I wonder what that's all about, because we might forget, or are these plants being taken advantage of in a certain way? And then my mind goes to, well, no, this plant is here for these journeys. Like, it wants us to tap into it this way. It wants us to explore these darker aspects. But it's just something that is definitely always comes up for me when I hear about ayahuasca, when I think about ayahuasca, and the amount of people where, it's been kind of like taken to a dark place for some people. So you're going there to actually probably tap into maybe something that happened to you that was dark. And then while you're in this vulnerable state, something is done to you to actually accelerate your trauma. It's very interesting. It's just something I wanted to bring up, because I think in life there's both sides. You have to look at the light, you have to look at the dark. Maybe you don't have to, but with wisdom, to have wisdom, I think you need to look at both. So just something I wanted to bring up on an aspect of that. And my heart goes out to people if something like that has happened to you, because that's pretty not cool if you were trusting someone in a ceremony like that, where it's supposed to be so sacred,
Yeah. One thing I love that I've never gone there yet on my path, but I have learned a lot from those who have, and that is, as a martial artist, I already know and value the way of the student and the master. But in these high shamanic rites, it's even more explicit. It's more clear that, the Bruja is playing Virgil. That Bruja, that's the psychopomp on this side, and there might be a bit of a handoff when you get to the other side. Your Bruja on the other side. I always hope that mine's going to look like Cuba Gooding Jr. I want him to be my psychopomp when I do my ayahuasca retreat. But you don't get what you ask for. You get what you need, right? But I want to point. I think there's a really beautiful positive spin here that may not have been spoken of before. And we all know that over 2,000 corporate executives stepped down over the past couple of years. That's a considerable number. If it's even remotely, if it's 200, I'm stoked. And wouldn't it be fascinating if these corporate executives taking a pilgrimage down into this Amazonas, into her territory, to meet her on her terms, and she gave them exactly the ego check that they needed to walk away from their corporate position. And I think that is really profound when we think about what corporate America has done to the Amazon territories. It is so profound that the corporate execs have lost that engagement. The question is, where did those tethers end up? That's a whole nother point to think about. But I just think it's so profound that Amazon has lured the corporate execs out of their high towers, and now they're all quitting their jobs. But let's not forget, what is the name of the corporation that's taking over the world? Amazon. It's Amazon. And that smiley face, Amazon Prime, that's Priapus. That's the spider bite boner pill from the Viagra that they built their empire out of. They're primed all right.
Yeah, created out of a garage. Amazon. Right. Maybe. That's a good weave, man. I appreciate that. Okay. I'm going to push this on to coffee. My favorite drug in the world. I've recently done a lot of cutting back. I was getting excessive for too long. But it's a really powerful, amazing plant. And I'm particularly interested in just how diverse the mythology around coffee's origins are. And I might get into that after we let Kyle take it away for us here.
Yeah, it's funny that you called it a drug, right? Because there's people on the road right now under the influence, driving under the influence of this plant. like as we speak. There's plants that we talked about tonight that'll change your consciousness, and here's another one. But see, the other ones are you're not gonna. Oh, did you have your morning cup of ayahuasca? Oh, okay, good. Don't talk to me until I have my ayahuasca. You know, on my mug it says. All right, we got Joe, another name for this plant. I think that's interesting. Just the name Joe, right?
That's
Java.
Yo. That could be like the sun.
Yep. Java, mud, cuppa. You call it bean juice, Chance. Daily grind, rocket fuel, worm dirt, just to weave back into the coffin. Okay. So a simple internet search of coffee is like, is coffee good for you? It's you're gonna get a generation of enthusiastic pages from, you know, the usual suspects of poison propaganda. They're gonna say John Hopkins studies that coffee makes you live longer, and like Mayo Clinic, coffee is the best antioxidant. You don't want to be a pro-oxidant person factory, do you? The society is opposed to oxidation. Seed diseases. Make sure you drink 2 to 6 cups a day to prevent idiopathic neurological diseases. We have no idea where those came from. WebMD. I don't know. Like, does your coffee take your coffee and your booster, kiss your life goodbye? All this kind of stuff. Yahoo. 33 reasons why coffee drinkers are more successful than you and bang more chicks, or something like that. And there'll be like a crop photo of some Italian stallion with a tailored suit on. So just that alone, like, to me, that automatically rings some alarm bells when I'm seeing like the usual suspects of like I said, poison propaganda being like, oh no, coffee's the greatest. Everyone drinks coffee. We have 10 coffee shops on this block. So in other words, there's a they that wants to be a capital TH, and they want the public to drink lots of coffee, right? So I want to kind of degrabble the medicine of the coffee shop here, or of this plant, and really highlight the medicine of it. But so we were touching on earlier about with grapes and other stuff about this, the forgetfulness, the amnesia that comes with this incarnation. And I think that coffee has something to do with that ritual. Like, I really think that there's a brain washing afoot. Gabriel's highlighted this in some of the recent episodes with the word rinse, like insurance. Like, every morning there's a ritual involving rinsing of beans. You know, you're washing away the liminal dream state, and that you can maybe talk about over the table before your coffee, and propelling it like a rocket ship into a supercharged consciousness state. And there's that subtly placed black mirror every day in the cup of coffee on your table. And I'm not saying that, you know, I know that not everything that glitters is gold, and not everything that is black is an abyss. But I do think that it's interesting to consider, right? So just esoterically. So anyway, what is known about coffee? Well, there's a bunch of studies, and everyone knows that coffee is helpful for heart disease and all this stuff. But it's really hard for me to figure out this information without going back to my foundation. So I'm just going to come at it from a foundational aspect of energetic qualities of the plant. So yeah, they say that it's really good for Parkinson's disease. They say that it's really good for preventing heart disease, and they say it's really good for stimulating the nerves and stimulating bronchitis. But can I make those assessments with my foundational application of flavors? And let's see here. So coffee, it's bitter. When you taste something that's bitter, it's going to have an instant effect on emptying out your stomach, on producing bile. You can smell the energy of bitter. A former way I would have described it is there's bitter receptors in your nostrils, but I don't really believe in bitter receptors anymore. But there's something about the smell of bitterness that you don't even have to taste or imbibe in this. And it makes you feel like, okay, I can go to the bathroom now because everything is just moving downwards. Coffee is really astringent. So it has this pulling together, like pull together your energy. And because it's astringent, it's going to be really drying. So things that are bitter are detoxifying, and things that are drying are also detoxifying. And this would be a really good medicine for somebody who's got like a wet, earthy, what I would call kapha body type, or even just in the springtime. Just about anybody in the springtime could benefit from a little bit of drying out from the elements of the spring and detoxification. And of course, coffee is heating. And I don't mean heating necessarily in the way that something is hot temperature wise. It's heating even if it's cold brew. It's exciting to the vitality. Okay, so that would mean that it would be contraindicated for people who have already like a lot of nervousness, who are already quite dry, and who are already like they don't have enough fluids really to let go of more. So you could think of it that way. However, in the Ayurvedic tradition, coffee would be regarded as something that stimulates vata, so more of the air element and more of the pitta element, which is, maybe what the culture wants us, to drink that so that we are more productive. But if you're really thinking about it in terms of your constitution, you can mitigate the effects of the vata, which is like it has this movement up and out. And that's what you can kind of imagine yourself if you drink a cup of coffee. Like you're bringing your consciousness up to your head, and it's like projecting outwards. And you can mitigate that with cardamom, which is the way that the Turkish coffee uses, which is cardamom, which is stimulates the downward wind in Ayurveda, which is called apana vayu, and it just makes all of that stuff that feels like it's up here and too much out here kind of go downwards. So yeah, maybe it is really helpful as heart disease. Maybe it is really helpful for Parkinson's disease. I don't know, and it slows the onset of dementia. I mean, I could find a lot of money in support of coffee. And I believe that as far as money goes, like there's two things in this world that are exported more than anything else, and they're both black and they're both watery. And one of them is coffee and the other is crude oil. And I just think that's really interesting, just the connection between those. There's two kinds of coffee. There's the Coffea canephora and Coffea arabica. And so most people, I think, in America are drinking the Arabic version. The word coffee is a weird word. It comes from an Arabic word that is related to, I think the word is like kwawe, which means wine, but it also means the dark one. So just the word coffee in itself. And that's because the coffee comes from Yemen and Ethiopia and these places of like the Cushitic languages. So it has a relation to the dark one, which is interesting. And the word canephora is a cool word scientifically. Like that means a maiden wearing a basket on her head in Greek. So in the Ophiuchus constellation has that like it almost looks like a weird shaped head, right? Like he's wearing a basket on his head. But it also means a caryatid, which is like a pillar supporting the roof. There's like the columns that would support like the top of the roof, the Parthenon, and those columns that were made up, that were stylized as women, maybe sometimes held behind veils and stuff like that. Those were canephora, or caryatids is another name for that, another definition. So there's another Ophiuchus kind of symbolism, which is that pillar that gives us the access to the higher roof, to the mountain of heaven, carrying the basket. The dark one propels us out of out of the liminal space. I remember this. There's this book that's by Stephen Herod Buhner called "The Language of Plants," And in it, he talks about an interview with some indigenous people in Africa, and they were asking like, what's the difference between, your culture and the Western cultures that you interact with? And they said the Westerners they just wake up once in the morning. And they were like, what does that mean? Well, it means that when they wake up, their mind just wakes up, but they don't wake up their heart. They don't wake up their heart. And so I think about that sometimes when I'm like, I try to abstain from coffee in the morning until I can feel like that liminal space between the dream world, between that amnesia where I had a dream about something, but I can't remember because I've been propelled into coffee consciousness. That heart opening waking has been successfully achieved. And then I will partake in my Black Mirror medicine. So that's my coffee weave. I'll leave it to you.
That last bit, there's a lot of wisdom in that, man. In my earlier adulthood, I didn't really drink a lot of coffee. It wasn't the morning ritual for me. And I remember that my morning meditations back then were completely different than what it's like if I meditate in the morning after coffee or in my current incarnation. It's way more like visual and that trance-like, and it's almost as if the transformation of America, in a sense, is partly aided by coffee because of the fact that substance, when you're on it, it changes your relationship to meditation. It changes the outcome of meditation, or it can. It changes your inner world sight. It's grounding in a way. It definitely like brings you into the physical moment in some sense, gets you into your body, but maybe that's a little too forced. Maybe it's not that it's a bad thing. Coffee's not a bad thing, but the habit of it might remove the ability to access certain other aspects of the life experience if it's always present, if it's always in your bloodstream, which for me and a lot of other people, it pretty often is. I'll throw down a couple of I'm really interested in what you were talking about, the word that might relate to wine and darkness. There's a lot of folklore and mythology about coffee. The Oromo of one of the largest Cushitic speaking groups of Ethiopia. So there's that Kush again of Ophiuchus. Their lore about how coffee was first discovered was that the sky god, like their sky father, Waka, sprouted the coffee beans from his own tears, from having to put somebody to death that was a loyal follower or something along those lines, which is back to the whole wine and grape and Bacchus of it. Waka, their sky god Waka, you just switch W and B and you got Baccha. And the full epithet is Waka Gorecha, which they say means black god. And that might be because they're Ethiopians, but it's interesting that their sky god is actually, the full title is like black god, and his tears created coffee beans. But it doesn't stop there. Muhammad legendarily was visited by Archangel Gabriel, and Gabriel gave him a mysterious potion. Turns out it was coffee, which gave him the strength to continue on his journey. He only had to have one sip of it, and he slayed 40 enemies and conquered 40 virgins on one sip of coffee. So, man, imagine Muhammad on like a full cup. Be too much, probably. So there's Archangel Gabriel showing up. I actually want to take a moment and show some depictions of Archangel Gabriel, because we talk a lot about Archangel Michael, but I think that possibly a lot of angel figures might be Ophiuchian in their symbolism, because we showed this with Matheson really well. But one of the common traits of Ophiuchian figures is like this angle that you see his staff at. it's a spear or it's a staff. You see it with Archangel Michael. The spear is usually at that exact angle into the serpent. And I think the wings might even be potentially like a different way of outlining the serpents, what becomes serpents in the typical Ophiuchus. I'm of all the Ophiuchian research that has been going on lately, I still am kind of not sure about the origin of it as a constellation, how far back our version of it, of a guy holding a snake goes. But it seems to me that in different places in the world, what they saw it as probably morphed a lot. And it's a lot of the figures that we've linked it to. But here's some more Archangel Gabriel. He's got the kind of classic Ophiuchian staff, you could say. There's the Annunciation. I just grabbed a lot of Gabriel photos. It's an interesting character. This is a Gabriel with a flaming sword from a medieval painting. So there's a sort of sync up with Archangel Michael. And there's with a shield. That's a very Ophiuchian thing as well. The shield is. And it looks like he's standing on some kind of devil or something. It's kind of hard to see what's going on there. The crested hat or the plumes on his hat, that's an Ophiuchian thing as well. There's that angle again. There's the feet at a certain angle that is reminiscent of Ophiuchus. And here's all three of them together, Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael, which it's very interesting. One standing on a rock, one standing on a man, one standing on a fish. And Gabriel's on the rock. But all that aside, go ahead.
Do you know what synaxis means? It's right there on that last painting. Synaxis of archangels. I see axis, I have to ask.
It means an assembly, like a congregation. It's a word referring to the orthodoxy. So maybe it's like, maybe on this. So this is Greek Orthodox, that picture we were just looking at. I should bring it back up. But maybe that's like a reference to the name of this church or assembly. Like that I have no idea. I don't know a whole lot about Greek Orthodox, but yeah, you see axis and you're thinking pole star.
World axis, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in a way, the angels, the archangels, the archangels in the sky, they form a type of assembly around an axis. That's for sure.
Sure.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Recently on the Slick Dissident Artistic Expression, we are claiming to have discovered the angels in the Enneagram. And if anybody cares to investigate the Hornavian groups, it is these three trines that divide up the personality types in a very helpful way. But if you look up the Hornavian groups, those are also correspondent to the personality types of the angels. And so Michael is asserter. He's much like Surtur. He's the assertive one. He's holding the assertive trine. Oh, by the way, the Hornavian groups is basically an anagram for thrones and Ophanum. So the name of the category is telling you this is where the angels are. So come on over to Slick Dissident. We'll show you how to find the angels real quick.
Right on. That's a good plug. Something you said, Kyle, just reminded me. I don't know if it's been mentioned here today just yet, but this whole idea of ascension or your higher self or moving upward, it's encoded in Ophiuchus as well, because the serpent is going towards the northern crown, right? And so it's really interesting. It looks like it's like right on the brink of like about to like chomp at it or something along these lines, but the crown being the top of our head, being related to like kind of like Aries symbolism, we're born head first. It's not uncommon to see like the crown on top of like the tower card, or on top of the tower in the tower card, so the fact that the serpent is going towards that crown, I think is kind of interesting, and to me just kind of relates to some of the stuff we were talking about. But I know Michelle has an affinity for coffee, and she was a barista for many years. Do you have anything to say about this one?
I mean, I could wax poetic on coffee for a while, but yeah, I mean, I've had to too, like really evaluate my relationship with it over the years because I realized a lot of things about it, you know, the dehydration aspect of it, the stripping of the nutrients, because that is one of the things that it can do because it's a diuretic. You know, most people know it will make you pee almost immediately after having it or go number two. You know, it is a flusher, you know, and I saw PK brought up, are we putting it into the wrong hole? And everyone who knows Amanda Vollmer knows that she's an advocate for the coffee enema, and I have yet to do one, but I do want to do one just to see what happens because I can only imagine the benefit because I imagine what the stimulation that would happen to the colon immediately because what happens when we put it in our mouths, imagine, you know, the other way. So when it comes to detox and cleanse, like that would be pretty amazing. I do think a positive aspect of coffee though is like the communal aspect of it, bringing people together. It's a communication starter, conversation starter. One of my biggest joys as a barista was to be able to talk to multiple people in a day, have regulars come in, make beautiful coffee drinks, latte art, you know, all the things. The beauty of it and that aspect of it is really nice. And in European cultures specifically, you know, it's very common to have coffee, especially in Italy, you know, after a meal because of that bitter aspect, because it's going to stimulate the digestion and just kind of like allow juices to flow to start breaking down food. So, you know, for as many things that are negative about it, I think there's also the positive things too. But it's all about the, you know, knowing your relationship with it and respecting it. I think that's the thing. And I think that's what kind of comes to my mind when I do think about the coffee culture, specifically in the West, that there are, you know, coffee everywhere, every day, every morning, all day long. It's almost like with any other herb, when you are disrespecting it, you're going to have negative effects with it. So I think that's it's just like finding the balance and not demonizing people if they do enjoy coffee. I think that's one thing too. Like there shouldn't be any shame if you do choose to have it. Just drink responsibly.
My solution for myself was that it wasn't about the amount so much, it was the window of time. So like yeah. I'd been doing it from when I woke up to like 3, 4 in the afternoon sometimes. Not every second constantly chugging, right? But potentially that entire range of time, coffee could come into the picture. So now I've just swapped to only in the morning. I'm noticing a lot of brightening in my energy from that, which is great. The first and most popular origin story of coffee, I had to point this out. It's another Ethiopian story that had to do with a goat herd. Here's an illustration of it, who I think his name was Kaldi. So here we have a shepherd idea coming back again. And he noticed his goats were very energetic and dancing goats. Interesting symbolism. And that's what led to the discovery of coffee's uses in like the 800s AD. And then, yeah, I mentioned before, there's the same story of Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, giving the use of coffee to Muhammad. Also has been said about King Solomon knowing about coffee. That's way more ridiculous and kind of a stretch. And then there's this magical cat that, this isn't a very good picture, but they look really cool. It's a, gosh dang it, what's the name of this cat? Hold on. It's called a civet cat or civet cat, Civet. And supposedly this cat carried the seeds of wild coffee, and where it pooped them out is where people discovered it, but it was growing somewhere far away, something like that in Africa. And that's how coffee got migrated across Africa or to the northern part of the world. So there's actually still people that will use coffee beans after they've been processed by this cat, as in is coming out of the cat's ass, Gabe. And then they're brewing it. The cat eats the beans and
catastrophe.
That's a real thing. Yeah, actually, when I was looking this up, there were like the top articles were like, this is a pandemic waiting to happen. Just you wait. We're telling you, we're going to get a pandemic out of all these people drinking coffee that came out of a cat's ass.
It's like a popular thing in LA. I think it's like
Yeah.
$10, or whatever. I don't know, probably $10 for a regular cup at the gas stations. It's probably like $25 or something like that for an espresso. Yeah, that's really interesting. Civet sounds like civil too, like the coming together. There's this communal aspect coming around, and I just think it's interesting too that Ophiuchus has this civic orientation that he's stepping out, and it's like the coffee shop is the place where all the individuals mingle to work on their anarchistic DIY projects. You know what I mean? Like I think it's a really interesting dynamic there with the I'm just thinking about like the Weimar Republic and when the National Socialists were stamping out that flaming thing. I think they were banning a lot of the coffee shops there because of that reason. They were like, they represented like a gathering place for countercultural ideas, even though it is like very like coffee shops have that countercultural stepping away from the mundane wheel, but also at the same time very much embedded in the culture. See Coffee. See Ophiuchus. What is he up to? I can't wait to hear what Gabe has to say though.
Well, there's also the Hebrew letter kaf, and that means grasp. That's one of the meanings of it. And just think how people clutch at and grasp at their coffee. That's and kaf is the letter that's associated with the fortune card, the Wheel of Fortune. And when you really think about it, not only does coffee do this, but also that other black goo, liquid, oil, but it's what keeps the wheel turning. You know, the Wheel of Fortune card associated with kaf. Kaf is grasping. Everyone's grasping at their coffee. They can't let it go. And it's what's keeping industrialized society moving and grooving, and office society and everything. You know, Ophiuchus, people got to have their coffee break at the office. Some people go to work just to get the free coffee.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah. I love that greasing the wheels. I love the word lubricious. It used to be like a pejorative for like, you know, people who were loose with their yeses in their nose. It used to, because they're slippery, but it also, coffee makes you lubricious because it lubricates your acquiescence. It gets you to say yes quickly. Yeah, shortens your thinking space. Great point about the coffee shops being hubs of revolution. I just heard recently that they were in orders of thought in philosophy. There's actually, the coffee shops were considered like the exoteric, and then there was higher forms of philosophy that was delineated somehow. There was actually a word for like, that was common folks philosophy for the coffee shop people, and we've got this other inside circle philosophy that's pretty far out. In the coffee shops are where the Enlightenment came from. And the enlightenment that they're talking about is the fact that now that people have coffee and are establishing their relationship with it, they stay up all night. And now they need more oil to burn to keep their house lit so they can get all the work done to be productive into the wee hours. And so this magnification of productivity like doubled people's output, but it also had that economic dependency on more oil for the lamps. And so the coffee and the oil blubber have a fascinating correspondence. And then one thing that just kind of popped in my mind as we were going along is the rules of hospitality are in mythology a lot, where a guest, you must greet a guest a certain way, but you also have to see them off with enough supplies for their trip. Well, that see off, SEE them OFF, that's an anagram for coffee. So as your guest is here having one last cup, you want to see them off and fill their cup so they leave with a full brim.
Oh,
And the fact that
Mario,
can you guys hear me?
your mute was again a little off sync. Go for
Gotcha.
it. Take it from the top.
Right on. I was just gonna say the anarchist thing to me is kind of funny because Michelle used to work at an anarchist coffee shop in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
So rest in peace, Olivia our Coffee.
Yeah.
Literally, the A in their logo was the anarchy symbol. And we actually had a lot of really interesting conversations there with people who would fit right in with you guys. So
I would say that shop was one of my best coffee experiences, I'd say. In terms of, just the space and the people and everything else. But yeah, that's a really great point. I like that.
Nice. Right on. We've got one more plant left, right?
We do, and it's one that is often paired with coffee.
It is. Coffee and cigarettes. There you go. Tobacco. So this was my last one that came through for Ophiuchus. I think we may have touched upon tobacco during the Saturn episode because Capricorn episode. But I think I just mentioned it because we talked about the Solanaceae family. But I had to bring it through for Ophiuchus because I have learned a lot about tobacco over the past year because we grew it here, and through that relationship, I've really come to respect this plant even more than I did before. I've never been a tobacco smoker necessarily, but I've always respected it in the aspect of it being like a ceremonial plant. It's kind of really highly regarded, obviously, with the native peoples of the Americas and throughout many other cultures. Because as we talked about, like, typically, too, what I didn't mention with the ayahuasca, a lot of times tobacco will be also used in those ceremonies. Sometimes it's even used in the brew for ayahuasca. And this has a really strong father masculine energy that I've really come to find with it, and a deep wisdom as well. There's a lot of varieties of tobacco. To be exact, there's about 81 different varieties. This one here is Nicotina tabacum. This is the typical smoking tobacco. This is a photo from our garden, but one of the reasons why I wanted to pull this photo in is just like look at the 4 directions coming through with these flowers. Thought that was really interesting because I think tobacco too it's a stimulant, just kind of like coffee is. So it can really bring you to a point of focus. So if you're trying to find direction or you need maybe some help with that, I think tobacco could be really good. Not even necessarily just smoked, but you can use this as a smudge as well. You don't have to always consume it. And I was listening to an interview with David Avocado Wolf, and he talked about tobacco specifically, and he said that it's the bridge between heaven and earth, which I also thought was a really cool weave with Ophiuchus. And if you see the way that tobacco grows, which there is a slide, the next slide over, Chance, there's a photo of the actual full plant, but on the left here. So that is it in its full glory. So it grows quite large, grows quite tall. And as you can see behind the tobacco is the mullein. And I found that the mullein and the tobacco get along really well, which I think is really interesting because they're both lung remedies, really. When you're looking at the structure of these plants, it grows very similarly. And so to see them kind of commingle really well in the garden was really cool. And then in the center, when we come to this photo with the Doctrine of Signatures, I posted this on my Instagram during the summer because I was just like blown away one day being out in the garden and looking at a flower that had fallen on the ground. And I looked at him like, is that a joint? And I may have dropped a joint or something in the garden, and come to find it was actually a flower, a tobacco flower that had fallen off the plant. And it looks so much like a burnt cigarette. And so it's just like the plant is telling you, like, smoke me, look at me, I want to be smoked. And so I started pulling air through this flower, and it was just like a tube that you could almost use to inhale the smoke through, And then, as we've talked about in other VibeRants about other plants, that whole aspect of when there is a pipe or some sort of like trumpet type flower, a hollow vine or something like that, that's a signature of it being a plant to help you communicate with spirit, to cross over into the other worlds, to communicate with the ancestors. which tobacco, is highly regarded as a plant to be burned and enjoyed, and the smoke is actually kind of like a symbol of you sending your prayers up to the heavens or up to your ancestors, as an honoring. And then on the right here, we just see how big the leaves actually are. And they're quite large. The scent of this tobacco is, it's heavenly. It's really just really sweet. It's resinous. The stickiness of this plant is very similar to cannabis, I would say. And so when you're harvesting it, your fingers get very sticky, and you actually you can get even the effects of it just from harvesting it, which I experienced. And tobacco almost tells you when it's ready to be harvested by just pressing your hand on the leaf, just gently with gentle pressure. And if it just snaps off, it just is ready to go. So it's very easy to harvest. You can actually even allow the leaves to ferment on the plant itself if you live in a warm, humid climate. Coffee likes warm atmospheres. Even when you're curing it and drying it, it likes to be put into tobacco. What did I say?
Coffee.
Oh, sorry. Coffee. Oh God, coffee on the brain. Holy shit. Yeah. So it likes to be in a warm atmosphere when it's dried. So down south in the United States, they have coffee barns. They'll use old barns to hang the coffee, and then they dry it in there. And sometimes they'll actually light fires, and then they smolder it down to coals, and they allow the smoke to cure the tobacco, and it imparts a different flavor. There's a whole huge awesome history of tobacco and how to cure it, and different methods that I highly recommend people looking into if you're interested in it, because it's really fascinating and it's really cool. But yeah, I've really grown to love this plant so much from growing it and learning about it. And one of the cool experiences I had with it is I had some of it drying in our garden shed, and I had other things that I had to carry in at that time. So my hands were full, but I had all this tobacco. I'm like, all right, well, I kind of just want to let's try and make one trip. So I took the tobacco that I had strung, and I just wrapped it around my neck, and I had it all across my chest. And as I was walking to the house, I just had this really deep, ancestral memory of something whoa, I feel like every culture or every person in every culture has done this at some point with tobacco. There's something really, really deep and sacred about this plant, and it felt so comforting. I was being held by the tobacco, and the tobacco wanted me to have it on my body. And I pictured men and women of small communities putting the tobacco around themselves and dancing in a circle or something. And there was something so strong about it that I wanted to share with everybody. And so it's a really fascinating plant. And I find it's interesting too, just like we're talking about with the coffee, that this is just hammered into people, smoking cigarettes, and the commercialization of tobacco, and the commercial side of cigarettes, and all the chemicals that are on it, and everything else, that by the time you're smoking a cigarette like that, it's tobacco, but it's so many other additives that the tobacco is almost kind of lost or something. It's very strange. So really interesting. But other than smoking, this was well known as a wound remedy. This also has an ability to kind of stop the effects of snake venom. So sometimes it's even put into drawing salves or pulling salves, like a black salve that has maybe activated charcoal in it and bentonite clay. You can add tobacco, and it can help to staunch the effects of a venom from a snake, or actually pull things out of the body, which I think is implied by the trumpet flower as well. There's some sort of sucking, pulling, vacuum sort of energy that comes from it. And the seeds of this plant are super, super tiny. What we're looking at on the right produces thousands of seeds. So if anybody wants tobacco seeds, email me, because I've got a lot of them. And I recommend everybody just trying to plant it, because I think it grows in many, many different regions. So have a go. It's really cool. lots of lessons for us here and us earthly beings from the tobacco.
Michelle, do you ever offer tobacco as before harvesting plants and stuff like that?
Yes, thanks for asking, guys. I forgot to bring that up. But yeah, typically I'll do it even after too, like leaving a little bit at the base of the plant. Yeah. And now what I want to do too is the mountain we live near, start offering it to the mountain and see what kind of communication opens with that. Because that's one of the things we've noticed up there, that people they leave offerings of all kinds, but tobacco being one of them. So kind of trying to like, seeing what happens with the mountain connection. But yeah, that's a great point. Have you done that, Kyle?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at too. I'm glad you brought that up because I love tobacco so much as a great, I don't know, as a great offering to spirit, as a great offering to the plants and harvest and everything like that. But I started to think about it one time because I would go to a place where I would harvest and I had no intention of harvesting. And I definitely got the message, where's the tobacco? Like, where's the tobacco? And I started wondering, and I started like kind of engaging psychically, like who's asking? And I got the feeling that it wasn't the spirit of the plants that was asking for it, that it was some sort of intercessor, sylph, gnome, like, psychopomp of the plant world, if you will, that was like, look, give me, I'll show you where the good medicine is. You just got to grease my wheels first. But I had no intention of harvesting. I had no tools. I had no tobacco. And I had that kind of fun conversation. So now sometimes when I go out there, I offer the tobacco and I make it explicit sometimes in a psychic way, that this is an offering for the plant spirit, and so there's no little forest middleman running around stealing the tobacco offering. And it's really fun. It's a really fun way of engaging with I don't know, just the medicine and the curiosity and the magic that all happens. I think that becomes available from tobacco. I really feel like tobacco opens up the playfulness that allows the plant's spirits to wander into my head or my biofield or wherever I'm getting these messages. And I also feel strongly about smoking the plant because of the same way. Like I feel like Gandalf, when Gandalf is like, I don't know what to do. Where should I go? He just like goes and has some like old Toby, he has some long bottom leaf from the Shire and figures it out. And that's the idea, is that there's the smoke medicine has this etheric quality that lends to spirit, to out there, to the ether, and creates that space. It's not a aqueous space. It's not a physical four-walled space. And that's why, passing the peace pipe, all these types of these ideas of like diplomatic delegation. And I see that in green speak in the name that I just thought of now. We have Nick, like old Saint Nick, like the name for almost like a Luciferic, terminal deity, and Christina, Nicotina. So there's like this interplay between like, both sides, at least in the green speak that I could pull out of the seance language. But excellent choice. I love tobacco. Probably one of my very favorite smells in the whole world is the smell of a fresh tobacco leaf. It is so awesome. Very masculine.
The use of it in the snuff form is big in the Amazon in South America. It's spelled like, it looks like it's spelled rape, R-A-P-E, but they pronounce it jepe. I've actually done this one time, and sort of a ceremonial sense. And if you have ever had, or somebody, the experience of like they just needed their smoke break or something, I just can't, this is too much right now. I gotta go clear my mind, and they want to go outside. There's a lot to the ritual with the use of tobacco that is sort of like grounding or resetting or clearing of the mind. But when you do it as this ceremonial snuff, it really clears your mind. There's the you that you were before, and then there's the you that you are in the moment after somebody goes and blows that tobacco snuff up your nose with like a bone pipe thing, and damn, it hurts. Your eyes are watering. Immediately, everything that's in your sinuses starts to drain out. It's very clearing. It's actually super healing, but it's not like using it in that way. It is not like, oh, I'm going to do this all the time. I'm addicted to this. You can't do that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some people do use it that frequently, but it just totally brings you out of your head and into the moment. Very clear. Everything becomes super sharp, you know, like the way that pain is a clarifier in a sense, but it's not like a terrible pain. Anyway, that's an interesting way to use tobacco as well. The ceremonial snuff, hepe. And there's I think everyone that's curious ought to try it sometime if they ever get the opportunity, because it's very powerful.
Yeah, that chance, the Repe ceremony somehow has been preserved. I want to say aggressively, very proactively. It's preserved in our language. In the Esau rune is it's like a reversed one. It's like the symbol one, but flipped around. And it is the symbol, I read it as the symbol of harmony. Euterpe is the muse of harmony, and she has this flute. This flute is crucial as the symbol for harmony. But it has so much consistency. I found it first in the Empress card. The Empress is holding a lotus flower with an extremely long stem, like obtusely long stem. Looking into it, I'm quite sure that that's not only the flute of Euterpe, but it's also the flute of the Hripe, Theripe. It's in the word therapy. We have preserved this Hripe that is a symbol of harmony, and musical harmony is a symbol of good health of the body. And so this harmony, I think, is the coming to righteousness, coming back to center, this center stick of this flute that she holds, this Empress card. But it's just so profound how that implement is a universal symbol, particularly for the number 3 on the Enneagram. It's just amazing. It's amazing. So something about that Ripe, I think there's still, I think it's used more than we think. And there might be specific snusses out there that we don't even have a name for, because to us, it just seems so archaic. But in the occult, I just see it preserved like a Tifereth of all the signs and symbols. It's a real precious treasure, that Esau, the flute. But to move on to tobacco really quick, I'm so excited about this one. What a grand finale. What an excellent finale. You know, it's like we're walking out of the forest from our herb walk, and we must remember Hecate. We have to remember the hedge. We have to acknowledge that liminal space, that walking from the wilderness, coming back into the world of the machine. This is appropriate. So the camel, right? The camel is the symbol of tobacco because of the herb trade, because of the herb routes. The camel is the gift giver. Gimel, it means camel. It also means a gift. And on the camel's back was wrapped tons of tobacco over the aeons. Those camels were responsible for bringing so much tobacco. But you know what's funny is camels spit. Camels are amazing at spitting, which is something that people who chew tobacco do. Another reason that this is so beautiful that we're ending on this is coming back to the fact that Ophiuchus compels remedy. There's something about finding this lost aspect that draws you in and makes you want to seek out this mystery. What else is there? What needs to be fixed here that people aren't hip to the 13-month calendar? Why aren't people hip to a 13-month calendar? And there is good reason, and the adventure of finding out why is important. But the tobacco has this same thing going on, where they've vilified your bruja, your tobacco bruja has been vilified. In fact, they killed a man for selling Lucy's. You know what I mean? Your access to these medicines has been captured and turned into dangerous political mental fixations. These vices have been harnessed. Vice president. We have a vice president whose name was Joe. We have a vice president whose name is Kamala. And now we have Joe Kamala pressing
Camel
Vice.
cigarettes.
Vice
Okay,
Camel cigarettes being pressed on the masses. Listen, I could go on and on. I mean, Zuckerberg, his name has sugar in it. They have seeded vice in their names to crop dust our minds so they could be the commodities. The commodities market is where they get quite a bit of returns on their crop dusting. But what I think is awesome is that we can grow our own tobacco. We can get this for ourselves. We can be our providence. You know what I mean? And that middleman, that devil on the corner, that CVS drug dealer, you don't need him. We can go do this on our own. Be careful though. Things like this get really heavily regulated. They're heavily regulated, but I just love it. I love that we're ending on this. But I want to share my communing with tobacco is still very sacred. It was always in ritual ceremony, and it was through that very safe experimentation, personal experimentation, that I was able to learn the secret of Argos. Argos was Hera's spy. He's covered with 100 eyeballs, and he's sent to catch Zeus in the act of sleeping around on Hera. So he's a spy. I mean, what better spy than a guy covered with 100 eyes? Well, Mercury comes and tells him stories. He talks really long, like I tend to do, and talks him to sleep. And I think he even sings him to sleep. And when the last eyeball finally closes, then Mercury chops Argus's head off, and then Hera turns Argus into the peacock constellation and immortalizes him in heaven. And the peacock has 100 eyes. Well, it was because of my relationship with tobacco that I could actually find this element of Argos inside of the communion for tobacco. And when I was partaking in the Chillum ceremony, I realized that all of my blood vessels attaching to the nicotine was actually activating 100 eyeballs all over my skin. And I was becoming, it was a shamanistic endeavor, and it was very sacred and very special. And so I recommend these endeavors because you gain context for the mythology. If you don't know now, you know. But you could go out and dance your own dance to prove my words right. But I think this is a weave I actually didn't bring up earlier. I think this is the halo and the wings. I think these medicines give us halos. They give us wings. They give us a certain kind of shine that I can share the light that I experienced when I partook of Argos. And I can encourage you on your path to go find a halo. But make sure it's organic. Yeah, man. Beautiful ending to stop with tobacco, because it has that shadow that we're trying to cleanse. And I think we're doing a pretty decent job. This is an awesome final finale.
Does it have to be though? Are we sure we can't all get together and do this again sometime? Because I feel like it'll happen.
I'm always open to more.
Yeah, me too. And we could talk about planetary stuff. I mean, we did the zodiac, and that's kind of a little. That's it's a little bit more categorizing. We can really open it up with some planetary stuff anytime. You know, there's 9 of those plus some other things. we can definitely expand the cosmos a little bit further with the plants if you'd like.
I'm into that. I'm also kind of hatching some other ideas because I'm enjoying just the notion of like mini series that run for like the course of a year, theme years. So I'm gonna probably host podcasts for the rest of my life. So I'm gonna be creative with that. And thank you, Lou, Polymathing. Thank you for this really kind super chat. He says, cannot thank all of you enough for this Astroherbalism series. You're masterful teachers, weavers, and keep us all smiling while learning. As Gabe says, give thanks and praise. P.S. Do it all again. And thank you for this super chat, Assassin and Braden over on Rockfin earlier with the super chat. You guys are awesome. And yeah, I think that we're there, guys. I'd love to give you all a chance to reflect before we wrap up, but I'm with Polymathing. I cannot thank you all enough. All of you here on screen with me, all the great people in the chat. This series has been a real treat, real pleasure, a real learning experience. To be able to do this in my house is quite an honor. So I'm giving thanks and praise forever and eternally that this resource will be something I can always turn to whenever I want to brush up on my understanding of the doctrine of signatures and revisit all the potential plant allies, teachers, healers that can be accessed in this amazing divine realm that we are part of. So let's go over to Michelle and Mario first.
Right on. This was fun. Thanks for having us, of course, and for being the host with the most. My final thoughts real quick, just regarding Ophiuchus, is I just feel like this center business is really at the heart of Ophiuchus, whether it's pointing to the center in the north, if that's your thing, which I think that for me, I think that was the primordial center. So the northern tradition, polar symbolism stuff that I go on about, or it's the galactic center, right? I think you can make the case either which way. Perhaps that the modern version is the galactic center, in between Ophiuchus, Scorpio, and Sagittarius, or this original center in the heavens, and the original sky clock, in my opinion, being Ursa Major around Polaris. I think that that's what Ophiuchus is speaking to, and I think that this is dangerous and it is controversial, because as you look for the center externally, I think it encourages you to find the center within, which is why I'm so passionate about this topic of the sacred center, right? And so that's my final thought with Ophiuchus. I also was going to mention at some point the fact that spirit and spiral, have the sp in common. And I think that's kind of interesting because there is a spiraling nature to spirit itself. And smoke being a very good symbolic metaphor for spirit and, the ether and things like that. But if people are interested in my stuff, they can find me once again at symbolicstudies.com. Michelle is at michelleshealinghome.com. And I'm going to hand it off to her for her final thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you again, Chance. Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Babe. This has been a really awesome series. Happy to come back for the 13th sign. And yeah, to second the point of the center, that's what I feel like all these medicines kind of point to. Working with your center, asking yourself questions, checking in before you imbibe, all these things, is it necessary right now? Do I really need it? Is it needed? And you'll know when it's needed. So I think that a lot of these plants and what we talked about point to more of that kind of stuff, and tuning in and making sure you're listening. So as Mario said, michelleshealinghome.com for all things the healing home. And thank you guys. Happy holidays too.
Yeah. It's funny. Right as you said tuning in, I was like, I should let everybody know, because we're streaming to your channel and to Mario's channel as well, that I do biofield tuning one-on-one anybody out there is interested in having their aura examined and cleared of any limiting or limited energies or beliefs, so that they can go into 2024 with a much stronger comprehension of their truest and highest self. I mean, there's not much more Ophiuchian than getting tuned and distangling or, removing the false personality conditioning so that your true self can come through, because that's one of the things about tuning your personal energy, the energy that's in your field. That's your consciousness, but it's also your memory. And the better that that's in flow, the more you actually know who you are and why you're here. So if anybody out there is in a type of rut that they feel like they're not exactly sure where to go next or what they even want, tuning is really good for that. It's also good for dealing with health issues that maybe other methods are not getting you there. And it's great for, I really enjoy the tunings with people who are already in a good place in their life and don't feel like they're in a crisis per se. They tend to have really incredible results as well. We break all kinds of patterns. I mean, with the last client, I helped them find the origins of their cyclical experience in life of when things got good, something bad happened right away. And we found the origins of that. You might be dealing with something a little more subtle. Why am I having this repeating pattern in my life, and how do I get rid of it? So there's all kinds of things tuning's great for. Kyle knows about it. He's been doing some tuning work of his own. He's, I'm sure, quite an awesome practitioner already because he's so intuitive. But I wanted to let everyone know about that. innerversepodcast.com/sound-healing is where you can find out more, or you can just email me about it. Since we are talking about healing, couldn't let it go. Got to let everybody know. And Kyle, let me kick it over to you for anything else you want to say or promote while we've got everybody.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, it's been awesome. What an awesome honor and journey to be with all you guys, Michelle, Mario, Gabe, Chance. Love hanging out with you. And it's so much fun. It's so much fun to talk to your audience about the plants, and then talk to you folks out there again on my free time. I love being a community herbalist in my town. I love being the person that people could come up to at a counter and bear witness to their testimonial about their health and whip up my potions in the back and make something special. I also really like doing that for your audience too, Chance. And so that's why we have that Interverse code. And then that way I kick over some of money over to Chance and his family. And it's been really fun. I released recently a incense workshop, and that's really fun. I'm doing it kind of like an elemental way. And I've been working on just writing a little elemental incense book. I made a little workbook for this one. It's 36 pages, but so it was pretty easy. I could probably write a 150-page elemental incense book. So I'm going to work on that here soon. And I really want to thank you, Chance, for being a great mentor to me in your shows, giving away all of your fun secrets so that we can make this realm a more healthy place with the biofield. And I've learned everything I've learned from watching your shows. And then I just go for it and I practice. And I've been doing, I'm a clinical herbalist, but I've been offering this this little biofield tuning herbal package, and not to the public, but just for some of my clients and stuff like that. So I'm working on it. I've been practicing, and it's actually really, really fun and a big step up in the nature of reality and understanding that and integrating that with the plants. And that's a really cool topic too, if we ever want to talk about that sometime, the plants' relationship to the biofield.
You let me know when you're ready to talk about that, because I'll have you any Wednesday or even on an Interverse episode. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm about that.
All right.
I'm all about that. And I'm super happy to hear that the content I've produced on the biofield anatomy and how tuning works was a stepping stone for you. That's what I want. I don't want to be just the only guy that can do it or one of few people that can. It's our birthright to know this.
Totally. Yeah. And I agree. It's really fun. Just getting in there and doing it, I'll make that same recommendation about herbalism. You know, there's some things that you just step with caution, step like Ophiuchus is stepping over a scorpion sometimes, and find some things that you can easily practice with, and take a season of learning and honoring plants. Maybe dedicate this next spring to learning about 5 to 10 plants that are growing in your garden. Those are the medicines for you. And guess what? They'll heal just about anything that comes up, because they're sharing the same environment, and it's really fun. Be happy to anybody out there, be happy to talk to you more about that. And I'm always happy to have side weaves with you all on the back end of things. It really makes my day to hear your voice on the other side. Thanks so much for having us, Chance. I really appreciate y'all. And Tippecanoeherbs.com is the place where you could find my stuff. Happy holidays.
Thanks everybody for hanging for almost 4 hours. It's a big one.
Got one more poem.
Gabe's feeling sentimental, needs to see us off with something special. I'm into it. Let's finish with that.
Yeah, man. I absolutely love all of you. It has been such an awesome journey, and this Astro Herb endeavor is like lifetime bragging rights for me. I'm so looking forward to this. And I know where all of my gifties are coming from. I know where to go. So this last poem is it's not really categorized, but it's an alleyway scene. It's named Clothesline Serenades. Elastic daylight fingers strum whimsical back-alleyed textures. Beyond windowsill, sun showers tilt. Sumptuous eaves dropping chandelier petals, pining to surrender to misty incandescent clothesline serenades. Wind chimes of scrimshaw and seashell keep time with rain rhythms under xylophonic ramshackle tin roofs. Steel drum wishing well compels descending glimmers to syncopate, to linger in prayer for next breath. Yellow dress ripples, reverberates, and falls in beaming departure.
Good night, everybody. Oh, I got to
Big
tell
love
you,
and
Gabe.
respect.
Former Vice President Biden on Rockfin says Slick is now officially in his long beard wizard form. Very fitting for this graduation of sorts. You've all graduated from the Astroherbalism series, or if you haven't been here for all 12 episodes previous to this, go check out the playlist. There's so much more if you enjoyed this, and it's timeless wisdom. So good night, everybody. We love you. Catch you on catch you on the flip.
Big love and respect, y'all.